Chapter 126. Litha's mind immediately went to Solaspedia, accessing the contents of Professor Rudd's book to assess how serious was their predicament. What the heck is going on? Freya was never far away from Quilla. All the failed dimensional spells have made the space in the class unstable. Quilla beat Lith on time, explaining the root of the matter. Normally, it would never happen, since space reconfigures itself after a while. But because in a short time frame, hundreds, if not thousands of spells have been cast, order turned into chaos, making it possible. The badly folded space wants to revert to normal, but it's too crumpled. Different spells are still lingering in the air, interacting together. If it keeps up like this, the whole training hall will turn into a huge fireball. What? Can't you dumb it down for me? Like anyone without Solaspedia, Freya was still at the basics, completely oblivious that over-bending space was like lighting a match in a coal mine. Don't cross the streams. Lith blurted out. What streams? Quilla looked at him with a puzzled expression. I mean, Freya, opening a warp steps is like folding a piece of paper. Two extremities separated in space can temporarily overlap before going back to normal, like a spring. What's happening is that multiple pieces of paper are colliding between them, but since it's not paper but energy, it will explode. That's why dimensional magic is taught only in academies. Quilla chimed in. All the training halls have specific protective arrays to prevent things like this from occurring. Students are bound to mess up, especially on difficult subjects. But according to Professor Rudd, they must have been turned off. Right after saving the dumb student from his own idiocy, Rudd took out his communication amulet to call for help. Only then he realized that using a dimensional spell hadn't been his brightest moment. New cracks started to appear in the points he had blinked through, spreading to the nearest ones until they formed a rough circle. Inwardly cursing, Rudd threw the amulet to the closest student. Then he focused all his attention attempting to fix his mistake that was about to generate a black hole big enough to destroy the training hall, if not the whole academy. Rudd, unless this is important, I'd like to postpone. Linjo's image appeared from the amulet. He seemed to be swamped in paperwork. His usually tidy desk had turned into a battlefield. I'm not Professor Rudd, headmaster. The student managed to say despite quite some stuttering. Who are you and how you managed to fake his call? Impersonating a professor is a criminal offense, young man. Hearing a squeaky voice, Linjo's finally raised his head, realizing something was off. I'm not impersonating anyone. He squealed. The professor gave it to me because the student had no idea what was happening or how to describe it. Because we need help. Cracks in the air, explosions, and something about not wearing protections. What? Linjo's could not make head or tails of it. Give me that, you dimwit. Lith used a mix of air and spirit magic to rip the amulet off his sweaty hands, explaining everything properly to the headmaster. Linjo's turned pale, but reacted promptly. I can reactivate the protections from my office, but that will not help with your situation. Has any of you already learned Restoration? It was an advanced dimensional magic spell developed exactly for situations like that. It was capable of restoring the natural order of things, dispersing the accumulated energy safely. Linjo's eyes were actually fixated on Lith. He had proved to be excellent in everything, and that gave Linjo's the hope he could pull another of his miracles. No, Lith replied. He knew the spell only because the book was in Solaspedia, but he had never tried it before. There was no chance Lith could manage to do it at the first try. With his luck, it would have made everything worse. Yes. Quilla's voice took everyone by surprise. Good. Then use it to assist Rudd. Help is already on its way, but because of the situation, we cannot risk using warp steps. It will take some time to arrive there, even by flying. As soon as the conversation ended, they regrouped with the others, deciding what to do. The students close to the exit had already run away, but the ever-expanding cracks and their explosions had now trapped all the others inside. Only about half the class was still present, along with Professor Rudd, and things were getting worse by the second. Despite all his talent, he was only a man. There were too many sections of space about to collapse. He hadn't the time to properly stabilize them. The best he could do alone was temporarily fix the most dangerous one before moving to the next, but after a while the patch would collapse, forcing him to cycle between cracks. Quilla proceeded to close the smaller ones, preventing them to grow and relieving Rudd, albeit a little. She had learned restoration because the group would always use her room for training in dimensional magic. Already having so little of her own, she was scared of losing them, so she had practiced it after everyone left for the night, further developing her mana sensibility by feeling the small damage their practice had caused over time. Lith felt helpless. For the first time in his life, he could only watch and do nothing. Let me guess, our friend Luckhard has already escaped. Indeed, Uriel nodded. He and his goons were the first to get out. Either they have great reflexes, or they knew. Lith completed for him. He then used life vision to check his surroundings, discovering that visible and invisible's cracks had almost filled the training hall. Swallowing a lump of saliva, he racked his brain, trying to find a way to make himself useful. Suddenly, Life Vyson showed him that the spatial crack that Quilla was fixing had turned white hot, albeit the change was unnoticeable to the naked eye. Reacting as fast as he could, Lith managed to shield her with his body before the explosion, conjuring at the same time a series of concentric barriers made of darkness, air, and water. From his fight with the Wither, he had learned that dark magic barriers, despite not blocking all the damage, would wear away everything. As expected, the dark layer reduced the strength of the impact. The air one blocked part of the shockwave, while the water layer smothered some of the flames. The remaining damage was enough to riddle the back of Lith's uniform with holes, burning his skin and hair. Oh gods, I'm so sorry, it's all my fault. Quilla's eyes filled with tears, but Lith stopped her, putting his index finger on her lips. No time for that. As long as I'm alive, we can regenerate everything. What's just happened? He tried to act, though, but he was now quite pale, his skin stretched from the waves of pain. Luckily, both Freya and Uriel moved forward, one healing Lith, the other supplying him with energy to withstand the process without fainting. I've never used restoration on distortions that big. I used the smaller ones to practice, but it seems I'm not good enough. There's only so much energy I manage to dissipate with my spell. The rest becomes unstable and explodes. Despite the fear and all that was happening, Quilla immediately stopped sobbing. She had just realized that it was the first time they actually touched not through the uniform. Lith's skin had a pleasant smell of soap, still bronze-colored from the years spent hunting in the wild under the sun. Would you manage to close them if they contained less energy? Quilla nodded, while Lith turned around, facing the nearest crack and flooding it with darkness magic. I have no clue about light magic, but after much thinking I'm quite sure that darkness is pure entropy. No matter what kind of energies a dimensional fissure is composed of, if I'm right, the darkness will eat them, until they become weak enough for Quilla to fix them. And if you are wrong, Sola's voice was worried-like when they had faced the Scorpicore. In that case, I suck at science as much as I do at magic. Here goes everything. Chapter 127. At first, everything went according to plan. Lith could see via life vision that the highly compressed forces stored inside the spatial crack were progressively weakening. But then, he noticed its edges turning white-hot, just like had happened to the previous one before exploding. Damn it, I was too naive. In this situation, darkness magic is a double-edged sword. It allows me to erode the energy, just as I predicted. What I didn't take into account is that at the same time, it accelerates the destabilization of the crack, making it even more volatile. Quilla, I did all that I could. Time for you to step in. Lith let the darkness fade away, hoping she had still enough time to complete her spell. At the same time, his hands moved rapidly, forming random signs, pretending to cast one spell after another, creating strong and thick multi-layered barriers in case something went wrong. Lith could only count the seconds, watching the fissure becoming more and more unstable, inwardly wishing for Quilla to hurry up and finish. Just when the crack was about to collapse, the restoration spell took effect, making it disappear with a small bang. One down, 1 million to go. Lith didn't find any joy in succeeding. There were still too many spatial distortions, and only a handful of seconds had passed since he closed the conversation with Linjos. Tom wasn't on their side. He immediately attacked the next crack, using all his focus and skill to speed the energy degeneration process while trying not to affect the fissure stability. If before he had just made chaos clash with chaos, now there was a method behind it. Lith could see the hot spots where different cracks overlapped, and gently used darkness magic to weaken the interactions between them before attacking their cores, avoiding chain reactions. Rudd had no such thing as life vision, but thanks to his talent and abundant experience, he could appreciate the finesse Lith was demonstrating by using darkness magic in such an unorthodox way. Brilliant. Simply brilliant. He thought. It's such a shame that his space sensibility is so much greater than his dimensional magic aptitude. And to add insult to injury, the only one capable of using restoration is a flimsy commoner. The world has really turned upside down. Here I am, fighting side by side with some inferior commoners that yet stand at the top of the class, showing unparalleled talent and improvisation, while the nobles do nothing but run like rabbits. Maybe I have grown too old for this job. Rudd inwardly sighed, closing one fissure after the other, trying to create a safe zone for the students. Meanwhile, Lith realized that the strategy was doomed to fail. They had only 2 mages able to use restoration, while the space distortions were too many and too strong to keep attacking them one at a time. Quilla, focus only on the cracks that I point out for you. Freya, you protect her at all costs with your Mage Knight's shields. I'm going all out. Without waiting for a reply, he enveloped several spatial distortions at once with darkness magic, marking each time the most dangerous one with a wisp of light. His hands and mouth moved like crazy, mixing random seals and words, giving Lith the alibi he needed to create small but densely packed barriers around the remaining cracks, this time trying to prevent the resulting explosion to get out, rather than get in. What in the God's name is that? Professor Rudd was flabbergasted by his performance. He is controlling so many spells at once, adapting the shape, size, and intensity of each one according to the situation. No matter how simple each incantation is by itself, the combined effect is on par with a Tier 5 spell. The number of fissures started to decrease rapidly, but it came at a cost. Only those treated properly with restoration would just disappear. The rest would suffer the corruption of darkness magic until they blew up. Thanks to Lith's efforts and planning, there were controlled explosions, but explosions nonetheless. He couldn't get too far from them. The hot spots were small to begin with, and he had to keep track of all at the same time with life vision. Each time, the flames were strong enough to overcome the uniform's magical protections, burning through the fabric and the flesh alike. The others were barely able to defend themselves with their combined efforts, leaving Lith alone. The burns kept piling up until the pain became unbearable. Lith was forced to use light fusion to regenerate the parts of his body that were too damaged, while cutting off the pain receptors with dark magic to avoid impairing his focus and movements. Where the heck is Linjos? He tried to yell, but the hot air had injured even his throat. His voice came out as a raspy hiss, before he started to cough uncontrollably, falling on his knees while gasping for air. Uriel immediately came to Lith's side, attempting to treat the most severe injuries without draining too much of his life force. You can't keep up like this. It's a suicidal move. Uriel was horrified. Most of Lith's upper body was now exposed, burned beyond recognition. His arms and back, which he had used to cover his vitals, had flakes of skin falling down at his every movement, revealing the bloody muscle tissue underneath. I don't know how can you handle so much pain without going crazy, but you need to rest or you will die. Thanks, man. Lith appreciated him being so concerned about him to be blind to the truth. But if I stop, we'll all die. Or do you have a god in the family that we can call upon for actual help? Lith smiled, patting Uriel's shoulder before attacking the next group of cracks. In the New World, religions were a relic of the past, whose only remnants were the old gods' names, used either as exclamations or swear words. Since humans had discovered magic, they had stopped believing in superstitions and devoted their passion and faith in the mystical arts. Even the so-called 6 gods of magic, one for each element, weren't considered real deities. They refer to the first mages that not only mastered the power of the elements, but also left behind their legacy, allowing their knowledge to spread and be shared instead of getting lost after their demise. Litha's words were meant to remember Uriel that it was useless to stay idle and hope for help. He was no hero. His actions weren't a selfless sacrifice for a bunch of strangers and an old coot. He was simply doing the only thing he could in a time of crisis, creating a path for himself and his friends to survive an unjust fate. For the second time in less than a week, Uriel felt stupid for choosing the warden specialization. Even if he had started casting a fire protection array from the moment Rudd had warned them of the danger, he would have never finished it in time. Yet he swallowed down his self-pity. Lith constantly needed healing and energy, hence Uriel focused on keeping close to him, assisting whenever he could to at least lessen his burden. Finally, help arrived. Linjos and several professors entered the class, using an artifact to completely clear the door's surroundings from spatial fissures. Litha's group moved towards them to escape the death trap. Yet the ray of hope quickly turned into despair. The students closer to the exit went into a frenzy, trying to force their way out even at the cost of trampling others. During the struggle that ensued, a girl pushed all those around her away, conjuring a powerful gust of wind. One of her victims ended up colliding with a spatial crack, triggering a chain reaction that quickly spread to the whole training hall. Cursing mankind's stupidity, Lith dashed forward, dodging people and explosions alike. Then, something hard crashed against his chest with the strength of a cannonball. The combined pain from the impact and the burns almost made him lose consciousness, and because of that, Lith didn't manage to change his trajectory. The hit sent him against one of the still open fissures that seemed to swallow him whole before tinging his world red. Chapter 128. The moment Lith collided with the spatial crack, he knew that something horrible would happen. Twisting and turning his body despite the blinding agony, Lith managed to use air magic to avoid crashing head first against it. But with the little margin he had and the feeble energy he managed to muster, avoiding the fissure entirely was impossible. His left arm penetrated it up to the head of the humerus, giving him the feeling that someone had thrown a massive boulder from a cliff, but not before gluing his left hand to it. It was like every single cell in his arm had been put into a blender filled with gasoline and a flint. It stretched endlessly in the deformed space, appearing and disappearing multiple times from different spatial cracks, before they finally closed down under the effect of Linjo's artifact. The result was that both Lith and his left arm were finally free from the dimensional vice. But while he was still where he had fallen, the arm was about 20 meters, 66 foot, away, cleanly cut from the shoulder with inhuman precision. Litha's world turned red when his mind went beyond the pain and the blood gushing out of the stump, realizing what had happened. No matter how many times he had mentally simulated the event in the past, the shock of the amputation almost overwhelmed him. Almost. Emitting an outraged roar rather than a scream of pain, Lith used what energy he had left to stop the bleeding, before his body collapsed due to the accumulated damage. The group had stopped in its tracks since their friend had been knocked down by a tower shield, ripped off the hands of his owner by the same explosion that turned it into a deadly bullet. While the others ran to his side, Floria turned back, sprinting to the severed arm and storing it in her dimensional amulet as fast as she could. According to my father, reattaching a limb is much easier than regrow it. The important thing is to preserve it in the best conditions possible. A dimensional item is the ideal solution, since it will not rot or degrade as long as it's in there. When Quilla reached him, she thought it was already too late. Despite being only partially healed, the stump bleed too little, and she was unable to feel a pulse. If Lith was really dead, she would have been forced to attempt a resuscitation maneuver, even at the risk of further compromising his body's integrity. But if there was even just a spark of life, she knew, or better she firmly believed, he would have made it. Damn diagnostic magic. It's too slow, she inwardly cursed, taking out a small mirror from her dimensional amulet and putting it in front of his mouth and nose. The glass fogged up, giving her hope. Uriel, you heal him. You have already given him too much energy. We cannot afford anyone passing away. Freya, enhance his life force. I'll keep him stable. Quilla's task was the hardest. She had to use diagnostic spells to find the most damaged organs, and then alternate healing and energy infusion without compromising the other's work. Too fast healing would kill him. He was too weak to endure more strain. Too much energy would kill him too. If the heart suddenly started pumping fast, Lith would either bleed out the countless open wounds or die due to organ failure. But if they acted with too much caution, his body would simply collapse. It was like a game of Jenga with cracked crystal pieces. One wrong move would mean the end, with no chance for a do-over. First, she finished mending the severed shoulder. Then she harmonized with her friend's spells, fixing whatever mistake they made in the heat of the moment. Unlike her, they had no real experience as healers. And to make things worse, their first patient without any professor's supervision was a close friend. Inwardly, all the three of them just wanted to run away, crying from that hellhole. They were already tired from the dimensional magic lesson and the nightmare born from it. They had been on the edge all the time, believing that every second would be their last. And when finally everything seemed to be over, they had been forced to stare death in the face. It was still morning, but it felt like a week had passed. The only things that kept them together were rage and stubbornness. Rage coming from the frustration of being constantly swept around by forces beyond their control, and a stubbornness that made them unwilling to yield at any cost. Alongside them, a silent but invaluable fourth player was fighting with everything she had. Solus had been constantly expending her own energies to keep light fusion active, after Lith had lost consciousness. When the kids had started their treatment, it had been her using invigoration to redirect their healing spells where they were needed the most that had allowed everything to go smoothly. Three young mages at their wits' end wouldn't be able to handle alone such situation, especially since Quilla was tired and short on mana after having closed so many cracks fighting alongside Lith, and Uriel had already passed Lith so much of his life force that it was already a miracle for him to keep standing without help. When they finished, he didn't smell like barbecue anymore. Most of the burnt skin was replaced by a new one, but the overall impression was still those of an overstewed lobster. Excellent job, but he is still in critical conditions. We need to bring him to the Academy's hospital as soon as possible. After evacuating the training hall, Linjos had returned to offer his help. When he bended over Lith, attempting to grab him, Quilla welcomed him with a perfectly aimed punch on the nose, resulting in a clear breaking sound and a nosebleed. "Are you insane?" She yelled at him with no respect for his seniority nor status. "We can't move him. He could go into shock from the amputation at any moment. Light magic needs time to take full effect. Have you really studied before becoming a headmaster, or did you just win the title at a raffle?" Linjos wanted to reprimand her harshly, but after noticing that her fist was still held high, in the optimal position for hitting him in the groin, he took a step back instead. "Young miss, I can see you are very upset, so I'll overlook your lack of discipline just this once." His voice was now nasal, until a simple healing spell stopped the bleeding and straightened his nose. "But for your information, now that all the protections are activated again, we can move him safely with warp steps. Besides being an excellent healer myself, I have already alerted the light department. Where in the god's name is Manohar?" "Right here," said the god of healing, punching him in the nose too. "Why did you do that?" Linjos was flabbergasted. "Because she is right. You are wrong and didn't tell me the patient is one of my own." Manohar formulated a quick spell that made Lith look human again, even regrowing his hair to a medium length. "Now it's safe to move him, you 2-bits healer," he said, throwing a mean look at the headmaster. "Did someone fetch his arm, or is it lost?" "I did, sir." Floria showed him her dimensional amulet. "Great. 30 points to the flat beanpole for the quick thinking." Floria didn't know if to laugh or cry at the rude remark. 50 points to each of you for saving a colleague, and another 50 to the scrawny shorty for the executed punch. First, this is not your lesson. Second, awarding points for assaulting a headmaster is unheard of. Linjos was fuming with anger. Well, you always knew I am an innovator. Manohar shrugged, opening a warp steps to the intensive care unit and disappearing through it with Litha's group. Linjos remained there, with his mouth agape, with a snarky remark still stuck in his throat while the rest of the staff was snickering at his expenses. Chapter 129. Derek woke up in what was unmistakably an hospital room. Even with a fuzzy head and a blurry vision, he knew there was only one place where so much white would belong. The sheets, the blind, even the walls and ceiling were white. He tried to rub his eyes, but discovered his right arm was cuffed to the bedside, while the left one felt so heavy he couldn't muster the strength to lift it. Must be the morphine. That or they tied me up, he thought. The last reasonable memory he had was about him killing the bastard who had murdered his little brother. F. King cops couldn't just let me die? I don't know if it's because of the brain damage or because they have heavily drugged me, but that was one heck of a dream. He shook his head, trying to clear up his vision. A little too absurd, even for a dream, though. Magic powers, a mystical sentient girl tower, talking animals, and a kingdom in danger. It only lacked a pink-dressed princess kidnapped by a fire-spitting turtle to be more ridicule. That, or me finding my happy ending with the girl in the tower. Heck, even if it was all inside my head, it has been the most meaningful relationship I ever had. He scoffed. Really? I would have never assumed you would think of me that way. Soulless Mind blush was so strong to overcome the boundary they usually kept to separate their innermost thoughts. Lith managed to avoid screaming in surprise and embarrassment only because the blind was pulled away by Professor Manohar that had come to check his conditions. "How is my patient?" he asked. Remember, the only acceptable answer is well and getting better. If you die on me, you'll ruin my statistics. Professor Manohar? Lith was still recovering from the shock. So it was all real? I know how this seems such an incident, if we want to call it that way, happening in the White Griffin Academy is simply unbelievable, yet happened. Odd. I perfectly regenerated your skin, yet you're all red up to your ears. Are you experiencing any discomfort? Or did you just have a wet dream? Litha's brows furrowed, while his memory was finally returning. Just a yes or no. I'm not interested in your fantasies. Lith blushed even harder, but this time out of anger, for the complete lack of tact of his healer. No discomfort and no wet dreams. Thanks for your concern. Why am I cuffed? I don't remember doing anything to deserve such treatment. Do you mean the chain? That's no punishment. It's just to prevent you from rolling on the wrong side. The wound is just barely closed. We still need to reattach your arm. After all, I would expect an accomplished healer like you to understand something so simple. Lith turned his head abruptly, trying to touch the little stump where once was his arm, but the chain stopped him again. At that point, Solus had regained enough of her cool to share her memories of the most recent events, bringing him up to speed. How long was I unconscious? A few hours is barely lunchtime. Manohar replied, right before casting a series of diagnostic spells that made Lith glow like a light bulb. Everything seems fine. Your body heals magnificently, young man. Keep up like this, and you'll get discharged in one piece before dinner. Manohar took out his communicator amulet, informing Linjos that the patient could receive visitors. Remember to properly thank your friends. They gave it everything to save your life before Manohar arrived. Usually Lith would have objected at the abuse of the word friends, but after looking at Solus' memories, he didn't feel so sure about it anymore. Wow, Quilla really punched Linjos. Was it really so dangerous to move me at the time? No, it wasn't, but I can't blame her for being protective. I would have done the same. Okay, then why Manohar punch him too? He doesn't seem the protective type. According to his rants while he was finishing to heal you, Manohar has always dreamed about hitting a headmaster and get away with it. Quilla simply gave him the inspiration he needed. He told her himself before awarding another 30 points. You know, I really like that girl. I would have nothing against her being your mistress until we find a proper body for myself. Another powerful mind blush made him understand that she wasn't joking at all, but luckily Linjos entered his room, saving him from such an awkward topic. Lith had never been so happy to see the headmaster's long and brooding face. Contrary to his expectations, behind him there was no trace of his classmates. He was followed by Professor Marth instead, and, thanks to his enhanced hearing, Lith could hear them repeatedly apologizing to someone. "We are terribly sorry for what had happened to your son, but as you'll see, he has received the best cures available in the whole kingdom. The reason we called you here is to help him overcome the shock of losing an arm. Albeit it is only a temporary condition, it could severely affect his mind and future decisions. We don't want him to quit the academy. It would be too great of a loss. Please be strong." Lith heard a snarl from his father. Raz, stopped by his mother, Alina, hurrying Linjos to let them in. They rushed to Lith's bedside, doing their best to not cry or stare at his stump. "Professor, please, tell me he's going to be all right." Despite all their efforts, Alina's eyes were watery and her voice cracked. Raz held her hand tightly, searching for the strength to appear calm and confident to reassure his injured son. "Don't worry, ma'am. We were just about to reattach his arm," Manohar said, throwing a flirtatious look at her. "I must say it. There must be something special in your bloodline." Lith started inwardly cursing nonstop. Maybe after looking at him and his parents, the genius healer Krishna Manohar had noticed some abnormality caused by him using invigoration on all his family to remove impurities from their bodies. "Otherwise, I can't explain why your son is so talented. You are so gorgeous, and even Lith's dear grandfather is so well preserved despite his age." At those Marth, Raz and Linjos became pale as ghosts, while fury tinged Lith's cheeks of red while his eyes were reduced to fiery slits. He couldn't believe his esteemed professor was actually hitting on his mother right in front of him. Despite the situation, Alina and Solis couldn't stop giggling. "He is actually my father." Lith's voice was stone cold, causing Manohar to gasp in surprise. "You are very lucky, good sir," he said, shaking Raz's hand, limp from the surprise. "Your son is a brave kid, and your wife could have got much, much better." If Lith's arm didn't had yet to be reattached, Raz would have probably strangled him for the repeated insults. "See, old man," Manohar said, patting Linjos on the shoulder. "That's why I tell you to never lose hope. In this world, there are still women that don't care much about looks." Before the situation became even more humiliating, Professor Marth dragged Manohar away. In the city of Kandria, all the hospitals and the healers' home offices were full to the brim, while the city guard was arresting lots of citizens for gruesome crimes. The two things had only one thing in common. All those involved would tell unbelievable stories to justify what had happened. A man claimed that his wife had caught fire while cooking lunch. A woman told them how his brother had turned into a piece of ice while conjuring some water to wash the dishes. An otherwise beyond suspicion healer was trying to explain how he never meant to amputate his patient's leg. It just had turned into a lump of meat after he attempted to heal a fracture. But the real cause was ensuing inside the local branch of the Mage Association, where many magicians were reporting how they had inexplicably lost their powers. Chapter 130. Despite Professor Marth's intervention, the situation degenerated as soon Raz and Linjos managed to recover from the vicious verbal beating they just endured. Who is that raving lunatic, and why is he allowed to have any contact with the students? He has no shame nor regard for the feelings of others. Normally, Raz would have been humble and submissive. For someone that had never left the small village of Lusha in over 30 years, the White Griffin Academy was intimidating. Raz was well aware that even a single brick of the castle was worth more money than he could earn in his whole life. Raz still couldn't believe one of his children had managed to get admitted in a place like that. He suspected that behind all his brave talk, Lith was actually having a hard life, surrounded by rich, spoiled kids. In any other circumstance, he would have never stepped inside, fearing that his presence alone was enough to put Lith in embarrassment. But now, after his son had been severely hurt because of the incompetence of the so-called professors, not only had he been forced to listen to Linjos rant about the Academy's prestige, but also had to suffer a young, handsome dandy trying to seduce his wife in front of his eyes. That was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. He didn't care anymore if the man in front of him was the headmaster or the king himself. Raz was determined to give him a piece of his mind. On the other hand, Linjos wanted nothing more than join him and tear Manohar apart limb from limb. That man had always been a nightmare for the public relationships, either avoiding social events or making a mess the rare times he deigned to attend them. And now, in less than a day, Linjos had been assaulted and humiliated by him twice, both times in front of students and staff alike, destroying whatever pride and dignity his role was supposed to have. I wish I could tell him that if the previous headmistress that recruited Manohar wasn't already dead, I would kill her myself, right after throwing Manohar from the academy's highest tower. But when I accepted this job, I knew there was an elephant in the room. Despite his many, many flaws, I can assure you that Professor Manohar is that kind of genius that appears only once in 100 years. He is an invaluable asset for the academy and the kingdom, whom has already saved countless lives, probably even your sons. Raz wasn't satisfied by the answer, but Alina squeezed his hand tight, stopping him in his tracks. "Are you in much pain, dear?" she asked Lith, ruffling his hair. "No, Mum. On the contrary, I feel groggy but relaxed," he replied, quite surprised to have hair again. He had yet to have an occasion to look at himself in a mirror. "That's because we injected you with several potions to help you sleep and recover," Linjos explained. Marth returned, bringing along 5 members of the medical staff and Lith's missing arm. Usually for such a simple case, a single professor was enough, but they wanted to show to both Lith and his parents how much they cared. The arm was completely wrapped in pure white linen gauze, not leaving even the fingertips exposed. Being detached from a living body, it couldn't be healed, so it was bound to be bloody and burned. Lith imagined that covering it was another form of courtesy towards his parents, since no healer would have blinked at the sight of it. The moment the arm was within 5 meters, 16 feet, from him, Lith felt that something odd was happening. His mana core started stirring inside of him, trying to release mana. Lith was too tired to put up a fight without a good reason, so he stopped resisting. "Solus, can you describe to me what's happening? I can't activate life vision without flooding my eyes with mana. Tendrils of energy are going out of your body and connecting to the arm. It is alive." When Lith felt the itchy pain from the burns, he was so surprised to unintentionally wriggle his left hand's fingers. Luckily, Marth was still walking, so the sudden movement went unnoticed. Now the mana is replacing the blood, reactivating the lingering light fusion from before it was severed. By my maker, it's healing on its own. Solus was free to express her shock, but Lith had to keep his calm demeanor, acting like everything was normal instead of panicking. Just to be certain it wasn't all a crazy dream, Lith attempted to bend the left little finger. It moved at will. Lith extended his remaining hand to Alina. "Mom, I'm a little scared now." Lith tried to convey his real feelings without arousing suspicions, at the same time drawing all the attention on himself. While focusing on his mother's warmth, he tried to call back the energies from the arm, but to no avail. The closer it got, the stronger the connection. The reattaching process went without a hitch, immediately followed by the healing one. Lith had to carefully remain still the whole time. A single spasm would betray his new and untimely secret. The night before the sabotage in the Dimensional Magic's training hall, a few hundred kilometers south from the border of the Griffin Kingdom, the High Council of the Desert Tribes had gathered, trying to plead their case to the benefactor. The Blood Desert was the biggest out of the 3 great countries in the Garland continent, the other 2 being the Griffin Kingdom and the Gorgon Empire. According to many, it was also the strongest and the most dangerous. The reason was that despite its harsh climate, the Blood Desert was the richest one in terms of mystic treasures and natural resources. While in other places to find magic crystals, one had to dig through mountains or explore vast forests. In the Blood Desert, it was enough to find an oasis. The geysers of world energy that everywhere else were hidden and could be found only by sheer luck or resorting to powerful artifacts like Solus or the Scorpicor's Pants Nez that would manifest themselves in the form of water, vegetation, and life. Among its dunes, it was possible to find rock formations rich in a rare metal, the davris, that after being smelt and forged, it would change its color from silver to black, according to how it was exposed to light, but most importantly was capable of cutting through iron like it was just wood. Davris was the strongest material known to man. Despite its name, the Blood Desert's sands weren't red, but yellow gold. It derived from the countless lives lost during the past wars, when the different desert tribes would fight among themselves or against the foreigners trying to rob them of their land. War had been a constant in the desert, because no amount of mana crystals or davris could turn the weather humid, quench the thirst of humans and cattle, or make the land fertile. Despite all the riches it held, food and water had always been the only currency that held any real value in the desert. In the past, the tribes would fight for the control of the oasis, either by their own will or manipulated by the people of the plains, wishing to exploit their needs to pursue the monopoly of resources. But not anymore. After the benefactor's arrival, the desert had been unified and the word competition had been replaced by the stranger-sounding cooperation. Oases were now shared, and each tribe would periodically rotate from one zone of the desert to another, allowing everyone to cyclically enjoy everything their country had to offer. Each of the tribe leaders, now simply called feathers, would receive wisdom and power, becoming strong in the ways of magic regardless of the talent they were born with. But what now could seem a divine country came with a price. The benefactor's laws were the only laws, and the lightest punishment for breaking them was death. The feathers would rule above their people, but any change, small or big, had to receive the benefactor's approval. Even the High Council had been reduced to a mere formality. Only one will really mattered. That was the reason it was now held only after the sunset, when the benefactor had a less fiery temperament. That night, the convened feathers were trying to persuade the benefactor about the many advantages the desert tribes would reap from invading a weakened Griffin Kingdom. Chapter 131. Their spies had brought news that a civil war was inevitable. It was the perfect moment to start planning their invasion. Speaking in their name was Ashen Dagfur, Feather of the Red Lion tribe, temporarily appointed as High Feather, first among equals and spokesman of the tribes. He was a tall man, around 1.84 meters, 6 foot, high, with a lean and muscular body, an olive complexion, and a long but well-groomed beard. Like all the feathers, he wore heavy white pants and shirt to endure the coldness of the night, and a turban on his head, with a huge ruby on its center to represent his status in the tribe. The meeting was held in a ceremonial tent, golden in color, whose sides and floor were covered by carpets and tapestries depicting the collective history of the desert. The roof of the tent was enchanted to be able to turn invisible at will, since the benefactor hated constricted spaces, and this way was still able to gaze at the moon and the stars. The space was perfectly lighted by 27 black iron braziers, one for each tribe. Their fires were fueled by the magic of their respective feather, used both to symbolize his strength and vote once a discussion had come to an end. As always, Ashen spoke with passion, describing all the green lands and water springs, waiting for tribes to seize them from the weak and stupid plainsmen. His black eyes searched for the other feathers' approval and support, but he found none. After he had begun his speech, all eyes were fixated on the lonely figure standing on the other side of the tent, watching its every movement. It was a fiery red bird, 3 meters, 9 feet 10 inches, high, with the body of an eagle and the tail's feathers resembling those of peacock. The legendary phoenix Salark, also known as the benefactor of the desert, that centuries before had united all the tribes under its rule. It was whispered that from each of its feathers, a peerless weapon could be forged, and that its blood held the secret of immortality. To fit into the tent, it had shrunk remarkably and was now in its most vulnerable state. Despite that, no man or woman among the feathers felt any kind of emotion aside from respect and fear. Salark stood still, its eyes closed, knowing it would not be able to control itself if it opened them. Once Ashen had finished, it asked a simple question. "So, are you going to leave the desert?" Salark's voice wasn't loud, but still sounded perfectly clear to all of those present. "No, my liege, the Red Lion would never do that." He raised his hands and lowered his head in a sign of submission. "I'm only proposing for us to take revenge against the plains and secure new resources." "Revenge?" it asked, opening a single eye. "To bring death to the living will not make their ancestors suffer. It sounds more like a petty excuse to leave, because you are unsatisfied with what you have now." "I will not leave, and I'm not ungrateful," he said, trying to appear strong and confident, but cold sweat ran down his spine. "Then how do you propose to keep the conquered springs? What good is a fertile soil if not tilled?" "Well, of course some of our men will have to stay behind with their families, but only to establish a supply chain that will benefit all the tribes." "I don't care for your sweet words, only for their meaning," Salark harshly replied. "You want for your people to move away, to grow their children in a foreign land, afar from the desert and from me. I have no objection to your plan." The last phrase left everyone shocked. Leniency had never been its strong suit. "But at the same time, I will give it no support. Those who wish to take part in it are free to do it, as long they first return to me all my blessings." The second part, instead, was perfectly in line with its character, making all the feathers turn pale. "Just to be clear, are you speaking as High Feather, as Feather of the Red Lion tribe, or just for yourself?" Salark's eyes opened, releasing a massive amount of killing intent that brought Ashen to his knees. Its talons tapping on the ground had the rhythm of war drums. "He does not speak for the Golden Eagle tribe," said a middle-aged woman standing up from her chair, just to kneel on the ground, her forehead touching the floor while her brazier turned black, denying the High Feather's words. "He does not speak for the Silver Wolf tribe." One after the other, all the feathers knelt down, the black light from the braziers projecting an eerie atmosphere. "He does not speak for the Red Lion tribe." Recognizing Ashen's failure, the elders that accompanied him disowned their leader, hoping to spare their people from being banished forever. Through a collective effort, they managed to snatch the flame from Ashen's control, turning it black and leaving him alone. The turn of the events had shocked him, but not to the point to not recognize what had happened. Beneath the tension and fear appearing on his peers' visage, he could see their lips curling into a barely contained smile. He knew to be unpopular due to his overbearing character, trying to benefit his tribe at everyone else's expenses. But that was because under his leadership, the Red Lion had grown to be one of the most populous and strongest desert tribes. Ashen had used that in the past to put pressure on the neighboring tribes, to gain more and give less, boosting his status in his community. When they had appointed him High Feather, he had thought they were finally ready to submit. Instead, it had all been a ruse to take him out without a war, in perfect accord with the laws of the desert. Whatever the outcome of the council, they would have gained a profit either by invading new lands or by eliminating a powerful rival. They had used his ego against him, turning Ashen in an unwitting, sacrificial pawn. He knew what was going to happen next. After being stripped of his title from the elders, the benefactor would take away all the artifacts and the book Salark had given him through the years. Lastly, it would strip him of her greater blessing, the gift from magic. Ashen had been a talentless youth before meeting the benefactor. The Phoenix had been fascinated by his passion and dedication to the tribe, sharing with him her secrets and wisdom, turning the boy into one of the mightiest magical warriors of the Red Lion. And now would take everything back. Ashen didn't know how Salark had boosted his mana capacity and magical strength. He had been made unconscious every time it treated him, but he had seen many times how it would revert the effects. A simple glance, and the victim's body would twist and writhe. The veins would turn blue and bulge out, while the mana would literally be squeezed out through excruciating pain until nothing was left. Ashen had lived his 36 years as a warrior, a leader, a man among men. He couldn't bear the thought of losing so much and live the rest of his life in disgrace. Before the sentence was carried out, Ashen used magic one last time, stopping his own heart. In death, his honor would be saved, and his family would be treated as the grieving relatives of a dead feather, instead like those of a traitor. The benefactor looked at the corpse, nodding slightly at Ashen's final decision. Solark had liked him as a boy and loved him as a man, but once he had become a leader, they had grown apart. The more power he acquired, the more dissatisfied he became. First stealing from his own tribe, then twisting the arms of the neighboring ones to quench his thirst for glory. And now, he had even the gall to ask for Solark to consent to a senseless migratory war. If the Phoenix had ever wanted to leave the desert, it would have already done it. If it wanted to bathe the world in fire and blood, Solark wouldn't need to spend centuries teaching the tribe's magic and how to prosper in the harsh environment it called home. I am Solark, the desert's son. My path is the only path. My words are law. It roared, spreading its wings, setting the whole tent and its occupants ablaze, yet burning none. I could be like the sunrise that harbingers a new era, or like the sunset that preludes a dark night. Summon me again out of petty greed, and all the tribes will need new leaders. Chapter 132. After Professor Marth finished healing Litha's arm, the bandages were removed, revealing that it was back to normal, except for one small detail. Unlike the rest of his body, that still retained his normal color, it was pale like it had never seen the light. Marth didn't miss the silent question in his eyes. Sorry, I don't know how Manohar manages to do that. In theory, it's impossible for new skin to retain any kind of tan, but that doesn't stop him from doing it anyway. Then, whispered in Litha's ear, "It's better if you go to Manohar later, if the skin problem bothers you. I don't feel like bringing him back here would be a good idea." Lith nodded. Both the headmaster and his father probably wouldn't be able to take in another one of his pep talks. "Professor, you have yet to tell me what happened after I lost consciousness." Thanks to Solus, Lith already knew the answer, but he needed to pretend to be curious about it. "Yes, indeed, but it's better if you hear it from the ones that actually saved your life. It took quite some effort to force your friends to leave your bedside and get some rest." His parents were moved. Hearing their son had such dedicated friends, Lith not so much, since it made crumble another chunk of his personal beliefs. It also raised a creepy question. "Solus, since now I'm wearing a hospital nightgown, please tell me Manohar didn't strip me in front of the others." "No, he didn't." She giggled. "But there would be nothing wrong with it. You are all doctors after all." "True, but if the situation was reversed, do you think any girl would like being seen naked by 3 of her male friends?" "It depends on the friends, I guess." There was a hint of malice in her words. "Okay, that's it." Lith decided to solve the matter once and for all. "Solus, what's happening to you? Ever since we came to the academy, from time to time you try to fix me a girl or another, say something inappropriate like right now. People aren't just slabs of meat, they have feelings too. That's rich, coming from you." For the first time since they had met, Lith could sense her anger. He didn't reply, waiting for Solus to vent out. "Since when do you care for feelings? All you do is line to manipulate everyone, fight like a madman, amass power, rinse and repeat. Have you ever thought about my feelings? About how scared I am every time you do something stupid, putting your life at risk like it's nothing? Or how envious I am of all of you, free to talk, laugh, walk in the sun, while I'm trapped all the day inside a ring of stone, living my life through you. And to be honest, is not much of a life. You have so many people that love you, so many chances to get close to others and become real friends instead of just pretending. Yet you always reject them like trash, and that makes me furious. You know, maybe the Scorpicore was right. Maybe I really am a cursed object because this life sometimes really feels like a curse." Despite she had no tears to shed, to Lith it was like she was bawling her eyes out. It made him feel terribly guilty and helpless. Too often he had closed himself to her, either to study or practice, speaking only to ask her help. They had been together for so long, yet he still sometimes treated Solus like some kind of home appliance. Lith couldn't deny anything she had said. To him, people were just tools, while feelings were a useless burden. "I am Solus. I don't know what to say. All this time, I never stopped considering how you felt, always taking your happiness for granted. It's not entirely your fault." She mind sniffed. "I never share my worries with you, because I was afraid you wouldn't care or understand. Thanks for proving me wrong." A warm aura spread from her consciousness, the equivalent of a hug. "By my maker, It was all so much easier when we just met. With me being content just with surviving, learning new things every day. But now, knowledge is not enough anymore. I want to feel, I want to experience, and you are my only window to the world. I should be the one apologizing for being so pushy all this time. Well, maybe between necromancy and forge mastering, we can find a way to give you a proxy body. A corpse or a golem. Thanks, but no thanks. I already feel like a monster. Sometimes, I don't need to also look like one. Besides, I think life isn't a problem to be fixed. More like something I need to decide if it's worth having. Lith didn't like at all how the conversation had turned out. His only true friend was suffering, and that wasn't something he could just passively accept. After changing into a new uniform, he let Professor Marth call for his friends that despite the short notice arrived incredibly fast. Normally, Lith would have found a way to avoid the inevitable group hug that ensued, but soulless words were still ringing in his ears. Progress, not perfection, he repeated in his mind like a mantra, resisting the revulsion that the physical contact with those four strangers arose at instinct level. They drowned him in questions about his health, repeating more than once how they had thought to have lost him. Alina was moved to the tears, seeing their affection for her child. Guys, allow me to introduce you to my parents, Raz and Alina. At those words, they finally released him. Raz shook their hands, while Alina embraced them tightly. If you ever come to pass in our village, you will always be welcome in our home. I'll never be able to thank you enough. After a few niceties, Lith prompted them to tell him what had happened after he crashed into the spatial crack. Despite already knowing everything, he remained impressed by their focus and dedication during such a critical moment, to the point of remembering the finest details. Obviously, with Linjo's present, they overlooked all the punching part. Then it was Lith's turn to express his gratitude. A simple thank you and a handshake was fine for Raz, who was a stranger to them. Not to mention, he was quite intimidated. For all he knew, they could all be prince and princesses. Lith had no choice but to put a big smile on his face and hug them one by one. While for the others, he managed to perform an in-and-out kind of hug. When it was Quilla's turn, she locked him in place. Lith could feel her hands running over his back, while she sunk her head in his chest, sobbing a little. After a few seconds, the situation became really awkward. Everyone was looking away, until Raz saw the silent plea for help in his eyes, and said, "Son, what do you want to do? Do you want to come back home, change academy, or stay here? We'll respect your decision, whatever it is." Only then Quilla finally let him go and hid behind Freya, blushing wildly after having realized what she had done. Lith pondered for a while. Despite all its flaws, the White Griffin Academy was still the safest place for him. Other academies would probably discriminate him for his origins and past, forcing him to constantly watch his back. Also, he still had to solve the mystery of the boxes in his pocket dimension, find a way to avert the Dryad's prophecy, and to save Solas from her misery. She could refuse his help all she wanted. Lith would never give up on her without a fight. "I want to remain here, Dad. I think I need them as much as they need me." Chapter 133. You'll not regret your choice, Lith. Professor Marth patted his back, with a proud look on his face. "Once you graduate, you'll discover that a ranked mages, like you and me, are treasured almost as rank S, if not more." He chuckled. What? Lith didn't know if to consider it a good or bad news. Because as you have seen, geniuses like Manohar aren't just brilliant. They are also willful, fickle, and unpredictable. We may not be as productive, but are much more level-headed and easy to handle. After the accident in the training hall, Professor Rudd had lost much of his nastiness. He now replied when someone asked him explanations, and whenever he saw Quilla or Lith, he would sigh, deeply shaking his head. In the following weeks, Lith put his heart and soul in forge mastering, relentlessly pestering Professor Wainmeyer with questions. He was researching both the runes that kept the boxes locked and a construct that was able to feel like a human. The library helped him greatly on his first task. Even if the exact sequence of runes wasn't to be found anywhere, Lith was able to determine their power and purpose. He came to the conclusion that opening at least one of the boxes was feasible if he had Wainmeyer level of mastery and a proper research team. Since that was impossible, he decided to take a roundabout route. Instead of attacking the lock from the outside, like a normal Forge Master, he would destroy its pseudo-core like only an awakened one could. The lock and the box had a pseudo-core each, both held in place by the respective mana pathways their maker had surrounded them with, thanks to the rune patterns. The main difference between a pseudo-core and a real mana core was that the former had no way to replenish its energies without the mage that had imprinted it. Hence, if somehow Lith managed to damage the pathways, the energy stored in the pseudo-core was supposed to leak without triggering the explosion, and the lock spell would be undone. Before doing this kind of experiments, Lith would always use his Hush spell and several barriers to prevent a resulting explosion to destroy his room or be noticed from the outside. After a month since the beginning of the second semester, Lith had already lost 3 boxes. All of them had exploded without leaving any trace behind, but he still considered it a success. Neither he or his belongings had suffered any damage, and with each box the explosion was getting weaker. It was only a matter of time before Lith could find the right way to puncture the runic pathways without the pseudo-core becoming unstable. Now I get why the Vision wanted me to save Nock and get to meet Kala. With only the box from Rodima's, I would have never managed to open it. I could either give it to the Martianess or Linjos, leaving me empty-handed, or try and fail on my own. He sighed. Well, for being self-taught, you are doing great. Marth and Wainmeyer always praise you for your talent and achievements. I think Wainmeyer already considers you the best student of the 4th year. Yeah. He sighed again. Someone is bound to get angry at me again, not to mention that I am falling behind in dimensional magic. Without the all-nighters, even Uriel is slowly catching up with me, and I have yet to learn the restoration spell that Quilla already knows. I must work harder. Maybe it's because Quilla has only 1 specialization, while Uriel just 2, and they are hardworking too. You instead are such a slacker. Sola's voice was oozing sarcasm. Top of both your official specializations, learning other specializations on your own, and converting them into true magic. All this while working on that lock, researching a body for me, and refining your mana core during your spare time. Which usually means when you are forced to use a bathroom or during theoretical lessons. You don't sleep from almost a month. Honestly, I'm amazed you achieved so much with only 24 hours a day. Progress, not perfection. Remember? You need to slow down. Can't do. The second trimester's exam is nearing, and no one knows what's going to be about. Must make every second matter. Since the explosion of Korn Haytorn's alchemic laboratory, the city of Candria had quickly plunged into mass hysteria. Just a few days after the event, strange diseases and murders had started to happen all around the city, and with the passing of time, things had only got worse. Healers from all the Marquise and beyond had been called for help, but despite both the Crown and the Mage Association were sparing no expenses to get at the root of the problem, they were getting nowhere. An information blackout had been enacted to avoid the panic to spread outside the city borders. Those who knew about the phenomenon talked about a mysterious plague haunting the province of Candria and were worried about it spreading. The body count had already reached the hundreds, and with each passing day, more and more cases arose, forcing the Crown to declare the status of quarantine 2 weeks after the start of the outbreak. Whoever tried to get in or out the city would be executed on the spot. The whole region had been enveloped by an array that prevented flying spells and warp steps to work. Silpha, Queen of the Griffin Kingdom and Supreme Head of the Mage Association, was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She hadn't slept properly since the Old Nobles' rebellion had started, and now, with the unsolved mystery of the plague, she felt she was losing her mind. The Queen hadn't missed how the current predicament had occurred right after Arjun went missing in action. The problem was determining how the 2 events were related. Knowing Arjun's prowess, she suspected it was all the work of an awakened one. It was impossible for a member of the Corps to be killed by conventional means during a simple recognition mission. Also, the fact that the best minds of the kingdom were still clueless was proof enough It wasn't something fake magic could achieve. Her problem was that aside from the members of the corps, the crown had no awakened ones, and Lady Tyrus refused to train more than 7 at a time. The remaining 6 members were already engaged in life or death situations. Otherwise, she would have never recalled Arjun so soon. The rescue teams were still looking for him under the lab's debris, but so far nothing had come out. Out of desperation, she took out her communication amulet, trying to reach for Krishna Manohar, the god of healing. He was the best healer of the kingdom, and her last hope. Aside from a magical plague, it could have been the effect of an ancient artifact. Such powerful weapon, if it even existed, once found had to remain a secret, and that was the reason why she had kept him as a last resort. That man was a loose cannon. Discretion and reliability weren't his strong suits. The amulet gave no response, even after multiple attempts. Having no time for his antics, Silpha called Linjos instead, demanding for Manohar's whereabouts and the reason of his unavailability. I would never dare to disobey a direct order of yours, Your Majesty, but alas, your first request is beyond me. Even I do not know where he is. As for the second, I think you wouldn't believe me without hearing it from the horse's mouth. The headmaster took a piece of paper and placed it on the amulet's gem, allowing the queen to read its content. Dear Linjos, the name was followed by a doodle depicting a horse bearing a striking resemblance to the headmaster, even wearing his clothes. I'm on the verge of an incredible magical breakthrough, and can't risk my research to be ruined by the constant pestering of mediocre minds, so I'll be gone for a while. Cam, how dares he to disappear again? It's already the 3rd time this year. Silpha punched her desk hard enough to break it in half. Send me your second best diagnostician. If she doesn't solve my problem, I'll have your head beside Manohar's in my trophy room. Chapter 134. Although invigoration allowed Lith to avoid sleeping, it wasn't without side effects. Back when he was still at home, he had several opportunities to relax, like when hunting for food, teaching Tis to fake magic, or simply spending quality time with his family. Now Lith was relentlessly working like a machine, piling up stress without any break outside his 3 daily meals. Over time, the accumulated mental fatigue made him more cranky, nervous, and aggressive. It was something the professors would not notice. Lith treasured them and did his best to hold his temper and treat them with the respect they deserved. The same applied to his friends. After his last heart-to-heart with Solus, he tried to spend more time with them, to give her what she needed, more emotions and human interaction. It would soothe her depression and wear down his nerves, but he didn't care. Solus always does so much for me. Not only she is basically my moral compass, helping me on all the academical subjects, she also restricts my most violent urges, making me almost human. Heck, if it was possible, I would gladly trade place with her. She would make a much better person than me. Solus was moved by how strong were his feelings for her, and how many sacrifices he was willing to endure for her sake. At the same time, thought she was very worried. The prolonged lack of sleep had only made more apparent that his mind and body were experiencing a major change. Since overcoming the bottleneck, Litha's body kept getting stronger every time the mana core was refined. As for his mind, the recent events had put a lot of stress on his already twisted psyche. Ironically, while near-death experiences were the norm since Lith had started to practice high-level magic, it was finding people that actually cared for him outside of his family that triggered an inner conflict. Changing lifelong values wasn't easy. It was like admitting to have always been wrong about almost everything. On the other hand, the same could be said about her. The quality and quantity of her nourishment had dramatically improved, and her mana core was on the verge of turning green. But what bothered Solus the most were her new feelings. Thanks to Litha's new enhanced senses, she could hear all the mean comments people would make behind his back, all the petty grudges that every praise he received would arise. The more she knew humans, the more disgusted she became. After he had almost died protecting everyone from the spatial cracks, the kindest comment she had heard was, "Even after losing an arm, we can't get him out of our hair for a whole day? That guy is worse than a cockroach." Solus was starting to think it was her being wrong all along. Lith was summoned by the headmaster less than an hour later. Queen Silpha had expressed her newfound interest for turning Linjo's head into a toilet brush holder instead of mounting it on a wall. After consulting with Professor Marth, the second best healer of the White Griffin Academy, Linjo's was left with no choice. If it's a life or death situation, cut the if. There are lives on the line, mine included. Linjo's interrupted Marth. Then I'd definitely send Lith from Lustria. Is the only one whose diagnostic skills are at Manohar's level. A student instead of a professor? How low have we stooped? What will become of the prestige of this academy? Linjo's moaned. Stoop. Marth knitted his eyebrows in disapproval. The new replacing the old is the way of life. Also, accepting someone that all the other academies rejected out of prejudice is not stooping, especially if he succeeds. But what if he fails? Linjo's was about to cry. We'll become the laughingstock of the kingdom. Everyone will think we are so incompetent we have to rely on child. Well, we can always send a couple of professors and hope for the best. At least you would fail with dignity. Linjo's groaned, his neck suddenly hurting. Failure wasn't an option. What about that other student? Quilla from Syria? At this point, sending one or two makes no difference. It actually does. Marth objected. Her talent for light magic is outstanding. I believe that if properly nurtured, she can become the next Manohar. Stop saying that name. Linjo's neck felt a new pang, feeling the executioner's axe nearing. I mean in a good way. There is nothing good about that man. Seeing the headmaster being unreasonable, Marth dropped the matter. As I was saying, she's a magnificent mage, yet she is too young to witness such horrors. Not to mention that her diagnostic skills are about my level. I'd rather go myself instead of putting her future at risk. As for our new star, he is quite special. Marth tapped on Litha's complete personal file. A folder almost as thick as a book, where the experts from the Mage Association had classified him as what on Earth would be called high-functioning sociopath. At that point, Linjo's had stopped resisting and accepted his fate. When Lith entered, he was wearing his old set of frown and glare. I didn't do anything wrong, and was about to have a magical breakthrough. When he had received the call, Lith was about to clear the second last exercise before attempting a real warp steps. After the sabotage, the fourth-year lessons had been suspended for a few days until the internal investigation was concluded. He had used that time to further practice under Quilla's guidance, and was close to placing 8 opening a gate. While most students had been scarred by the event and needed psychological counseling, he had continued his studies like nothing had happened, managing to catch up with those more talented than him. Litha's choice of words only intensified Linjo's feeling of impending doom. The headmaster gave him a file containing all the relevant information about the events in Candria, explaining to him that his presence was required to shed light on the matter. I'm just a student, Lith replied, giving back the folder. What does this have to do with me? What Headmaster Linjo's forget to tell you, boy, is that this isn't a request. This is an order from the Queen herself. The voice belonged to a man about 30 years old, 1.82 meters, 6 foot, high, that walked out of warp steps that opened right in the middle of the room. He had light brown crew-cut hair and mustaches of the same color. He was wearing a deep blue uniform, bearing on the heart the royal crest, a triangular shield representing a prancing griffin with a crown on its head and holding 2 scepters in his front claws, one representing the magical power, the other the military one. Lith, allow me to introduce to you Captain Belagros from the Queen's Corps. Captain, this is Lith from Lustria. Linjo stood up, offering his hand to his esteemed guest. Were you spying on us? Or did you just wait in order to make a dramatic entrance? Lith wasn't impressed, more like annoyed. His bad mood made him blurt out what normally he would have just thought. Kid, this is no laughing matter. People is dying this very moment. If you can do something about it, it's your duty to. People dies every day. Lith shrugged. Usually it happens to the poor, the orphans, the homeless. Yet no one gives a damn about it. But if it happens to a few rich guys in a fancy city, then suddenly it becomes a huge problem. Also, I have no duty since I took no oath. So, let me rephrase, what's in it for me? he said, rubbing his right thumb and index fingers together. Normally, Captain Vallegros would have been tempted of teaching the arrogant kid a lesson, but he too had read the file. It was clearly stated that because of his upbringing, Lith had no real ties to the kingdom. That was the reason his family was so tightly protected. The orders were to not antagonize him, unless it was absolutely necessary. Chapter 135. Captain Vallegros could only grin and bear Lith's attitude, and not only because of his orders. The more he looked at the youth, the more wrong everything felt. The cold and dead eyes, the detached attitude, were all things he had seen plenty of times, but never in kids. They were traits found either in battle-hardened veterans or in madmen with an agenda. Last, but not least, back when he had stepped forward with an intimidating manner, his body had started screaming for danger. A member of the Corps didn't manage to reach his age without developing a keen instinct, and in that moment his own was telling him to back off and avoid sudden movements. "How much do you want?" he asked. "You say it like I'm extorting money. Before being a healer, I was a hunter, and the first thing I learned is that hunters don't do favors, we cut deals. Here's my offer. I do the job, and if I succeed, I get a safe house for my family. I don't care if it's because the Civil War breaks out, we get invaded, or there's a sudden drought. The second something goes wrong, I want them safe and out of the kingdom. Deal." Lith extended his hand, and Vallegros shook it without hesitation. For a moment, Vallegros had feared the kid would ask for a ridiculous sum of money or an artifact. Instead, he had demanded something simple and reasonable, albeit expensive, leaving no space for bargain. "Deal. And what if you fail?" "If that happens, we both would have just lost a few hours of our time." Lith shrugged. "As long as I can use invigoration, there's nothing I can't diagnose. Curing it, thought, is another matter entirely. If the plague is something beyond my comprehension, not even true magic can help me. It will take more than a few hours." Vallegros explained. "Warp steps are blocked in all the region. First, I need to have an exit point set up for us in the vicinity. Then we'll reach the quarantine borders by flying. It will take a couple of hours to arrange everything." "I thought we were moving right away." Lith frowned. "In this case, I want our deal recorded in writing and signed up. Words may fly away, but writings remain." "Not a problem. Use the time to settle your business or to arrange your baggage before leaving. Depending on how it goes, we may be stuck in Candria until tomorrow. And remember, you're not allowed to speak about the mission with anyone." Lith walked away, ignoring the last trivial order. He moved quickly toward his room, his aim to catch as much sleep as possible before departing. Being in his weakened state while inside the academy was one thing. It was full of professors bound to help him, and an hospital that could heal him as long as he had a single breath of life. But on the outside, he didn't care if he was with the Queen's Corps or the Queen herself. He would always act as he were alone. "I'm so happy you took this mission." Soulless Mind smiled. "So many people are suffering. We should help if we can." "And that's where you are wrong." Lith objected. "If you volunteer every time someone is in danger, you'll live your life for the sake of others. Give an inch, and they will take a mile." The demand of payment served multiple purposes. First, if I succeed, the vision should be foiled, at least the part that I really care for. Second, it showed them I'm no puppet. Only soldiers obey without questions, and only idiots and saints work for free when they could get the right compensation. Solus pondered on those words. Once she would have dismissed them as Lith being cold and cynical. Now she wasn't so sure anymore. After Lith left the headmaster's office, Vallegros started arranging the last details for the mission, while Linjos couldn't stop sighing. Is this the society we really want to create? A world where heroes are actually cold-blooded killers? At this point, I don't care what the Queen will do with me. I find way more terrifying the idea that if he succeeds, such a person will become a role model. I hoped that nurture could beat nature, but it seems I was wrong once again. Captain Vallegros laughed out loud at those words. "Dear Headmaster, I don't know where you lived until now, but when I attended the Water Griffin, it was a nightmare. The pranks, the competition, the stress. So, what nurture are you talking about? Do you coddle the students here? Take them by the hand." Linjos shook his head, blushing a little from embarrassment. I've seen a lot of people like that. They usually end up in jail, join the military, or become successful merchants. It depends on how much they are able to restrain themselves, usually picking jobs where they can legally ruin the lives of others or use violence. Think about the adventurers or speculators. Most of them are like him, yet everyone dreams of becoming rich with quests or being acclaimed as a self-made man. Have you ever stopped considering how much death is hidden behind their fortunes? If he does his job and doesn't go on a murder spree, then he is fine by me. Not even a minute after Lith was summoned in Linjo's office with the Academy's public announcement system, a call was made from within the White Griffin to Archmage Lockhart. "Lockhart, you idiot, the Queen has asked for our help." "Who cares?" Lockhart didn't like being insulted, but decided to let it slide. Having a traitor in the Academy was worth enduring a foul mouth. I already made sure that Manohar got the ingredient he was looking for, so he is out of the picture. According to Haytorn, there's no one else that can understand the plague's nature. Despite the accident in the lab, everything is going smoothly. Smoothly? The voice sneered. Triggering a quarantine and alerting the whole world about your experiments is far from what I call going smoothly. Also, Linjo's has just summoned Lith from Lusha, so you'd better take action fast. Who cares about a kid? He can die in a fire, together with his filthy little village. The voice laughed out loud. If you keep underestimating the same kid that saved Distar's daughter from your prized poison, taking away the only silver lining in your utter fiasco of an assassination attempt, and later stopped the spatial breakdown with no casualties despite my sabotage, then you are a bigger fool than I thought. Lockhart snarled. Both failures still haunted his dreams. The first was supposed to take out Martianist Distar's whole family, but because of Ain's presence they had only managed to injure the daughter. The second had gone even worse. The death of his students would have caused an uproar, setting the foundations for the next step, leading to Linjo's execution and forced the New Nobles faction to either drop all their claims or start a civil war. Both scenarios were perfect, since in Lookhart's mind they would end up the same way. His faction would win, and the commoners would have to submit or die. Can't you just turn off the protective system and kill him? You really are stupid. After the sabotage, our rings have been stripped of several functions. Now only the headmaster himself can interact with the Academy's control system. You really are useless. Lockhart slammed his fist against the table, bleeding a little. Useless? The voice gasped in outrage. I arranged my lessons so they would be much easier for your sons. I made sure that the clackers would haunt the location where the most promising commoners would appear. I deactivated all the protections so that a class full of students could be decimated. If I am useless, then what about your precious offspring that keeps getting outclassed by commoners? I'm starting to think this is all a big mistake. Maybe we should just accept the change. Never. Incapable of bearing any more of that nonsense, Archmage Lockhart hung up the call. Chapter 136. A little longer than 2 hours later, Lith was woken up by a clerk, prompting him to go back to the headmaster's office. The sleep hadn't been much, but enough to take some of the edge off his mind and partially reset Invigoration's effectiveness. Vallegros welcomed him, giving Lith a copy of their agreement and keeping the other for himself, before warping out the office. They materialized on a grassland, in the middle of nowhere. Lith looked around, instinctively searching for familiar landmarks, finding none. The only structure in sight was a circle, formed by rectangular wooden rods, from which they had emerged from. The rods were about 2 meters, 6.5 feet, high and 3 centimeters, 1.8 inches thick. Each of the 4 sides was engraved with bright red runes, pulsing with power, that went opaque as soon as the portal closed behind them. Waiting for them, there was a group of 3 women and 2 men, all dressed like Vallegros and with various weapons dangling from their belts or backs. They immediately started to disassemble the circle, storing the rods in dimensional amulets. Is it your first time seeing a temporary waypoint? Lith nodded in response. Crossing hundreds of kilometers at once would be impossible without such a device. By knowing its frequency, I can use it to lock into these coordinates, while the others pumped their own mana in it, allowing for us to get here with minimum mana consumption on my side. Solus, how strong are these guys? Each one of them has a blue mana core, so in theory they are stronger mages than you. Also, everything they have is heavily enchanted. Compared to their clothes, your uniform is like a firefly besides a torch. Invisible. They were all of different ages and builds. The youngest one seemed to be barely over 20 years old, while the oldest seemed to be nearing the 50s. Our destination is in that direction. Vallegros pointed towards south-southeast. It shouldn't take much by flight. Half an hour, tops. At his command, everyone cast his personal flight spell, advancing with a wedge formation with Lith as its center. He used that opportunity to activate life vision, discovering that despite they had superior cores, their magical forces weren't much stronger than his own. On the contrary, Lith's physical prowess outclassed everyone else's, even without using fusion magic. After a few minutes, though, their spells disappeared abruptly, sending them into a free fall to the ground. Luckily, they were flying low, around 5 meters, 16 foot high, to avoid being visible from a distance, so they ended up tumbling on the ground instead of splattering. The core's protective vests absorbed much of the impact, but Lith wasn't wearing one, and his uniform's weak point was offering no protection against blunt impacts. He made the earth under him soft and elastic, bouncing and rolling to disperse the momentum. Ambush! Captain Vallegros roared, while he and his men assumed a defensive position. Lith and Solus activated life vision and mana sense respectively, discovering that they had stepped into a very complex array. This is clearly a high-level warden formation, Solus observed. Besides disrupting air magic, making flight impossible, somehow it also compresses space. I can't access to our dimensional pocket, and I bet that even blinking or using warp steps is impossible. Cursing his bad luck, Lith alerted Vallegros of Solus' discovery, while readying both fake and true spells. He would do everything to keep his secret, but dying for it was not an option. CRP. The kid is right. Vallegros had just tried to warp them away, but to no avail. Fall back. We are sitting ducks here. Vallegros had no idea how Lith had assessed the situation so fast, but that wasn't the time for questions. With no movement spells, escaping the encirclement would be difficult, and with their dimensional amulets sealed, their resources have been dramatically reduced. How deep are we into the array? He asked, noticing how Lith's eyes were burning with mana. Very. They probably waited for us to be in the middle before activating it. Makes sense. Vallegros nodded. I would have done the same. Any direction was good as another. They were still in the open, with no natural formation offering them cover or protection. Vallegros picked one at random, making his team move fast, but keeping the formation to not leave blind spots. To his surprise, despite being the shortest, Lith had no problem keeping the pace of their jog. Since this was a last-minute operation, the only possible explanation is that there is a spy in the royal palace. Otherwise, it would be impossible to set up a trap like this on such a short notice. Vallegros inwardly swore to find the traitor and give him a slow and painful death. Suddenly, several gates opened in the air. From each emerged a person wearing a guerrilla combat suit that unleashed a Tier 5 spell on the core unit. The air filled with countless spheres of fire the size of a house, while the ground all around them exploded in razor-sharp rock shrapnel. Lith realized that the Queen's core unit was doomed. The aggressors could turn on and off the jamming field at will. Wiping them out with hit-and-run tactics was just a matter of time. He quickly activated all the barriers he had ready, only around himself, opening at the same time a deep hole in the ground right under his feet with earth magic. The assault continued for several seconds. The earth trembled like there was an earthquake, forcing Lith to keep digging away. The shockwaves from the surface only grew in intensity over time. Damn it, and to think that Uriel always nag about useless a warden is. I can't believe a whole unit of the Queen's Corps was done so easily. One after the other, the life forces of the 6 people assigned to escort him faded away. Lith was shocked and angry. There was nothing he could have done to save them, even by revealing his status of Awakened One. The attack had been too quick and well-coordinated to open a hole big enough for everyone. And even if somehow he managed to, the enemies would have noticed, using Tier 5 Earth magic to squash them like bugs. It wasn't the first time that Lith had been forced to retreat, but it was the first time that such an act left him with a bitter aftertaste. He had never experienced such helplessness before, making him aware that he could only cower and hide, like a rat. A few hundred meters to the east, the leader of the Talons was admiring the result of their work through a surveillance mirror. Once again, no survivors, no witnesses, no proofs. Pharaon Neagle and his men were the best at their job, and they were proud of it. The Talons was a mercenary unit, whose members were once part of the elite troops from the armies of all the three great countries, but had been dishonorably discharged for violating the warrior code by either pillaging, raping, and/or murdering in the territories that they were supposed to protect. A few of them were actually wanted criminals, but the Talons knew how to take care of their own. Offering their services to the highest bidder, they live a life of luxury, being the living proof that their countries had made a big mistake by discarding them like trash. Captain C. Pitt, check for survivors. Neagle ordered to their warden. Come on, General. There's nothing left but a crater. It's a waste of my considerable skill. Despite not being part of the army anymore, each one had a military rank and a status in the unit, according to his/her talent. Do it anyway. We have a reputation to uphold. Yes, sir. C. Pitt was the third in command, yet sometimes he forgot how anal retentive the general was. C. Pitt disabled his arrays, allowing him to open a warp steps right above the crater and then cast a life detection array, a warden spell that in many aspects resembled Lith's life vision. From underground, Lith was still able to see the magic portal opening with life vision. What the heck are they doing now? In their place, I would either wipe down any trace of the massacre or check for survivors, if not both. Good gods, General, you are right for once. We have a rat. Thanks to his heightened senses, Lith was able to hear the warden's snarky remark and react accordingly. In all his years as a soldier first and a mercenary later, C. Pitt had never seen anyone moving so fast. Charged to the brim with air fusion, it took Lith but a second to get out of his hiding spot, cross the warp step, and rip C. Pitt's head from the neck with his bare hands. Chapter 137. Although his entry appeared overbearing and dramatic to the members of the Talons, Lith was actually quite desperate, and so was Solus. The moment the snarky man had revealed his presence, he knew that he had just went from the frying pan into a volcano. Whoever those guys were, they had mastered the discipline of spatial magic to the point of making it an art form. Lith could only run or fly, but against an opponent that cold bend space, blink, or switch, it was useless. His only option was to get in and kill them so fast they would not even understand what had hit them. It was time to test the limits of his new body. First thing first, we need to kill the warden. Lith thought, not knowing it was his intended target's head that he was throwing to the nearest enemy, making both heads burst open for the violence of the impact. Our only hope is to find him before he casts another array, otherwise we are screwed. The only silver lining is that warden spells are slow as. You focus on the killing. Solus replied, I'll collect as much intel as I can about our opponents. If I see the slightest hint of warden magic, I'll tell you. Sadly, the Talons unit was comprised only by veterans. Hence, as soon Lith beheaded C. Pitt, it took them barely a second to recover and regroup. The one Lith had killed with an unconventional headbutt was simply too close to dodge the projectile. Pharaon Neagle, the general, instantly issued coded orders that his men were ready to execute. The element of surprise was already lost, and Lith had yet to face 9 more people. Black 2, Red 3, White 4. Despite the target was just a kid, Neagle employed an extremely aggressive tactic. His creed was that no matter the opponent, never underestimate, never relax, never talk until the kill was confirmed. The 2 most skilled melee expert would kill him. A worst-case scenario, keep him busy while 3 mid-range specialists would cover for them and stall enough time for the 4 long-range spellcaster to put an end to the struggle. Cursing his bad luck for the umpteenth time since he was born back on Earth, Lith prepared to face his incoming enemies. First, he pushed his mana core to the limit, emitting a light cyan aura that enveloped the space around him with a mana so dense that the air started to crackle. Then, he infused his body with all the 6 elements, while casting one of his new spells as fast as he could. The 2 talons were a man and a woman, the first using a sword and shield combination, the second twin swords instead. Bloodlust and madness twisted their features, to the point that not even Uriel would have wasted time pondering if she was hot or not. Beware, all their equipment is on par with the core. Even their tattoos seem to be enchanted. Solus warned him, "Just my luck. I need a damn weapon to block enchanted blades, but I still can't afford the Academy's prices." A chunk of the tattoos disappeared, boosting their speed like a high-grade potion and allowing them to reach Lith before he could finish casting. They placed in opposite directions, forcing Lith to create a blind spot in his visual field. Much to their surprise, he didn't even try following the movements of them both with his eyes. Instead, he turned his back on the shield man, focusing only on the double-wielding woman. Nonetheless, they didn't lose focus, executing a 2-pronged attack where each strike was meant to corner the prey, by making the attacks coming from the partner harder to evade. Yet Lith dodged them all flawlessly, even those coming from his back. The first exchange was more than enough for Neagle to understand what was happening, forcing him to violate his creed already. "What are you doing, you idiots?" "That's full guard. Red, white, fall back." To prevent their target from escaping, Neagle started weaving the anti-air magic array. For a split second, the talons froze, thinking their general had gone mad. Full guard was a common mage knight spell that created a spherical blue aura with a radius of 1.65 meters, 5.41 feet, all around the caster. Thanks to full guard, a mage knight had no blind spots. Whatever entered the sphere would be detected, allowing him to counterattack and dodge with surgical precision without even looking. What Neagle said didn't make sense, though. The cyan aura surrounding their target had a radius of over 20 meters, 66 foot, something every one of them knew by experience was impossible. The spell range, even at Tier 5, was supposed to cover only the length given by the arm plus weapon length. When their instinct and discipline kicked in, making them obey the order, it was already too late. Lith had previously ignored the earlier football coach gibberish, but now, violating his creed, Neagle had exposed himself. "Warden at 3 o'clock. Solus shouted the moment she recognized the energy pattern. Lith exploited the opening, darting toward Neagle while extending his arms, with a motion that made no sense to his enemies. At that distance, any spell coming from a ring could be easily avoided. The red and white team moved backwards, without stopping their chance, trying to keep the distance from the prey, while the black team was in hot pursuit. Their problem was twofold, though. Lith was too fast for his chasers, and no one in the Talons knew of spirit magic's existence. Fast like a snake, tendrils of pure, invisible mana traveled the space between predator and prey, coiling around Neagle's head. Spells rained on Lith from all directions. Some he managed to dodge, others he had to tank in order to not lose focus, letting the combined effects of Earth Fusion and his uniform to block most of the damage, while Light Fusion regenerated the wounds as soon as they were opened. With each step he took, Lith's magical force became strong enough to overcome Neagle's enchanted protections, horribly deforming his head before popping it like a balloon. Spirit Magic's range had already reached 50 meters, 54.7 yards, back when he had saved Count Lark's family. Now, it could hit as far as Lith could see, yet the farther he was from the target, the weaker the effects. Okay, the Warden is down. 8 more to go. With a bit of luck, the shock from my use of Spirit Magic should stun them for a couple of seconds, giving me plenty of time to evening the field. Yet, luck was a fickle mistress. What Lith ignored, knowing nothing about military except what he learned from the movies, was that in such tight-knitted units, there were only two kinds of generals. The ones whose death would destroy the morale, turning them into sitting ducks, like he had hoped, and the ones whose death would turn his soldiers into battle-frenzied demons unafraid of death. Farion Neagle belonged in the second category. Most of the members of the Talons were either psychopaths devoid of empathy or cold-blooded killers. They didn't care about anything but themselves. Killing Neagle was the equivalent to cutting their lifeline. They had no idea how to survive outside the battlefield without him. A few were even grateful to him for having rescued them before their execution. Each and every one of them took it personal. To make things worse, Brigadier Fida Barut, second in command, quickly regained her cool, avoiding the situation to devolve into chaos. Black 4, Red 2, White 2. Don't let the general's death go to waste. F. King, kill him. Brigadier General Barut was an ex-member of the Queen's Corps. It was thanks to her knowledge about the Corps' protocol and equipment that the mission had gone so smoothly, up until Seafit's death. Unlike the others, she had already seen someone moving so fast. Once, Barut had been a member of the Queen's detail, witnessing her inhuman speed. During an ambush, she had killed 3 assailants before her bodyguards could even move. In her mind, now everything finally made sense. All her questions had found an answer. Why 6 members of the Corps had been sent to protect an insignificant commoner? Why the pay was obscenely good, even for the Talon standards? The F. Kerr is a member of the royal family. She shouted, "We have to make this quick before they send someone looking for him." Everyone in the Talon had heard Barut's tale at least once. No one had ever believed her, thinking it was a self-delusion from when she was still a rookie. But now things had changed. Barut couldn't believe that Neagle had hid from them such a valuable piece of information. She knew not even the general took her story seriously, but being so meticulous, that act of carelessness seemed so out of character. What? Lith couldn't avoid to inwardly sneer at that rubbish. First, I'm a bastard son of Count Lark, and this time of the Queen. 2 more enemies coming up close. Solus warned him. Lith could only sigh with relief. Just what the healer ordered. Then, he activated the spell he had previously casted, turning the world around him dark. Chapter 138. Being a self-taught true mage with very little knowledge outside of Tier 3 had always been a problem for Lith. He had to make up from scratch most of his spells, and not having much free time, if not none at all, his toolkit was quite limited. For such reason, most of his spells were derived from imitation. Floria's Full Guard, the Re-Slipstream effect, or the Wither Dark Aura were all tricks that he had picked up along the way. His fight with the planned abomination had allowed him to further understand darkness magic and how to overcome its obnoxious limitations. Darkness was an element capable of inflicting an enormous amount of damage over time, and to add insult to injury, it was extremely hard to defend from it. On the other hand, though, darkness-based spells were so slow that outside niche situations they were nigh useless. Vampiric touch required physical contact, hence it was a last resort. The Wither's Dark Aura had good range, but required a huge mana expenditure compared to the damage dealt. That was why Lith had thought long and hard about it, trying to figure out a way to use darkness magic to cover for his weak points. No matter how much he planned in advance, he was still an amateur fighter, lacking any professional training. Despite being much slower than Lith, 2 members of the Talons were enough to force him to go all out just to not be turned into mincemeat in a few seconds. Thanks to their rich battle experience, they were able to anticipate his movements and adjust their attacks accordingly. Not to mention that even speed could do only so much in front of such refined teamwork. The moment they closed in, they had used the range advantage granted by their blades to restrict Lith from escaping or counterattacking. To gain the upper hand, he needed to fight dirty and shamelessly like before, exploiting the fact that his opponents knew nothing about true magic. When the 4 melee experts approached, black tentacles emerged from Lith's body, trying to grab whoever came near. The Talon's first instinct was to cut them down, but the tentacles were made of pure energy, so they passed through the blades like a breeze, lashing at the enemy's bodies, sucking out their life force and giving it to their master. Death Call was the answer Lith had devised to his problems. Anyone that came too close would have to endure the vampiric touch of the tentacles. They were nothing more than a dense mass of dark magic guided by his will. The compact form meant that, unlike the dark aura, the draining effect was fast and efficient, while the mid-range of the spell made the slow speed irrelevant. Thanks to full guard, Lith was completely aware of his surroundings, therefore able to manipulate every single tentacle like it was one of his limbs. Combined together, the two spells offered a perfect defense. Come close, become food. Stay away, suffer true magic. Lith didn't need to attack anymore. He could simply focus on dodging while the tentacles did the rest. Barely a few seconds after the activation of Death Call, the close-range Talons realized what was happening. They were out of breath, their movements getting sluggish, each strike sloppier than the last. Their opponent, instead, was suddenly fully healed, either dodging or deflecting their combined attacks with his bare hands, without even breaking a sweat. But the most shocking part was when the five of them, Lith included, noticed an unforeseen side effect of the spell. The four Talons seemed to be aging by the second, their hair getting thin and gray, while their faces were now full of wrinkles, the skin started to sag. It was actually a mere cosmetic effect, caused by the sudden loss of moisture and life force. Nothing that a few drinks and some rest couldn't fix. No Talon feared death, but age? That was another matter entirely. For the first time in many years, the members of the Talons started to feel fear. From the moment Seepit had opened that warp gate, their day had quickly turned into a nightmare. Since when kids could rip off heads, since when spells could be cast with no magic words or hand signs, how could possibly exist someone capable of killing a soldier of the caliber of Neagle with just a wave of the hand? Last but not least, what kind of monster could summon an unnamed horror? Black, fall back. Red, fire at will. White, hold your fire until red is done. Fear had never made Barut falter, and this time was no different. By alternating the waves of spells from the two teams, she planned of raining on the monster enough destruction to make the nightmare end. When the four of the black team tried to retreat, they discovered that the black tentacles had turned solid. Infused with spirit magic, they dragged back their victims, using them as meat shields against the incoming attacks. It was after the first shockwave arrived that Lith understood to have gravely underestimated Tier 5 spells. The four bodies, even with all their magical protections, were barely enough to block the first one, a densely packed chain of lightnings that boiled the four Talons from the inside, turning them into charred corpses. The second spell from the red unit ripped them to shreds, forcing Lith to dodge and wave countless wind blades, capable of cutting through rock and dirt like a hot knife pressed against butter. Those he didn't manage to avoid penetrated deeply into his flesh, stopping only halfway through the bones. The wounds were too extensive to cut off the pain receptors, otherwise his whole body would go limp. Seeing that the monster was still alive, and four more Talons had died, their fear turned into despair, but that didn't stop them. In battle, there was no time for whining or grieving, only victory or defeat. Barut and the last member of the white unit unleashed their spells too. Lith had no choice left. He could only fly away as fast as he could. He used all his remaining strength to raise a stone wall after the other, hoping that between the distance and the makeshift barriers he would manage to survive. Whatever it was, it hit with the strength of a volcano. The spot where Lith had been until a split second before had turned into a vortex of purple flames that exploded with great violence, turning the stone walls and pebbles, trampling them like they were just domino pieces. Lith stopped wasting his energies on magic fusion, keeping only the light one to keep regenerating his present and future wounds, and earth fusion to try to save his life. Everything else he had was focused on his speed, tried to avoid being reduced to a pile of ashes by the purple flames. Despite all his efforts, the explosion kept getting closer and closer. Lith wasn't fast enough to outrun it. His only hope was to get far enough from the epicenter of the spell to take as little damage as possible. But it was all useless. Even from a distance, moving faster than a bullet, Lith could feel the scorching heat burning his feet despite the magical shoes and earth fusion. When the flames engulfed him, Lith stopped even flying, letting the shockwave carry him away. A cold shiver ran down his spine. The fear almost made his mind go blank, but he refused to surrender. In a last gamble, he used all his remaining strength, even aided by Solus, to insulate himself with a thick barrier made of air, quickly revolving around his body to deflect the flames and avoid direct contact, while using water magic on himself in a way that in any other circumstances would have frozen him to death. Despite his water magic spell, the air inside the barrier quickly became so hot that he had to stop breathing to not burn his lungs and throat. His skin got covered in blisters, his open wounds immediately cauterized. The pain was strong enough to make Lith cry, and he was happy for it, because despite keeping his eyelids closed like shutters, he still feared that without the tears his eyes could boil. Chapter 139. The few seconds Lith spent in that blazing inferno felt like hours, constantly wishing for the pain to stop, while his lungs were desperate for air. When it finally ended, he crashed on the ground, tumbling multiple times before coming to a halt. The first breath of fresh air he took was the best he had ever had. His normal vision was blurry, but life vision showed him clearly that there was still no trace of his enemies. Playing dead had no sense. They had discovered him once, they could do it twice. Lith immediately started healing himself, using invigoration at the same time. Thanks to the world energy, his wounds healed much faster than normal. The bones mended and the burns disappeared without leaving any scar. Solus, any sign of those be his starts? You traveled several hundred meters because of the explosion, but they are catching up fast. They'll blink here before you are finished healing. Damn blink. I can't get close, while they can escape any time. Also, from range they can dodge or block everything I throw at them. It's only a matter of time before they kill me for good. I'm almost out of tricks. Determined not to die, Lith stood up, waiting for the enemies while racking his brain for a solution. By the gods, he is still alive. Barut and the 3 survivors were all that remained of the talents. That's impossible. Lieutenant Callant couldn't believe his own eyes. That was a F-King War Mage spell. It's supposed to blow open castles and can't even kill a kid. That's no kid, Lieutenant. That's a monster. I'll cast Raging Sun again. You 3 prevent him to interrupt me or run away at any cost. We owe it to our fallen comrades. The 3 Talons assumed a triangle formation, but didn't dare to approach. If 4 had failed, there was no reason for 3 to succeed. Damn, at this distance, I'm powerless. Think, Lith, think, how can we save ourselves? There must be something we can do. Something only us can do that will take them by surprise. A cruel smile appeared on his lips. There was still hope. He dashed toward the chanting woman with air fusion, using full guard again to not miss any movement. The 3 performed a blink, planning on using hit and run tactics to not fall prey of the tentacles. But thanks to the combination of life vision and his enhanced speed, Lith was able to see where the gates would open and react accordingly. He changed direction, aiming for the nearest gate, punching with his full force before the enemy appeared. The hit crushed the Talon's trachea, even severely damaging the spine in the process. Lith kept moving forward, while the corpse still stood up, with a shocked expression on the face. The 2 remaining Talons reacted by instinct, thinking their teammate had simply missed, letting the target slip away. They blinked together, one in front of the target, the other at his back, only to discover he was ready for them. Lith grabbed them by the throat. His hands were strong like a vice, snapping their necks with a twist of his wrists. Thanks to the distance, Barut was barely able to distinguish what had happened. Just like the Queen years ago, Lith's movements appeared only as a blur, but years of training told her to run away. Lith's smile grew wider, while his spirit magic was coiling around the last enemy. He twisted her hands behind her back to prevent her to cast spells or use magic rings, choking her at the same time. Even if Barut had been able to talk, Lith wasn't willing to listen. He knew that if not for the fact of being an awakened one, he would have already died many times. He feared her and what she was able to do. Letting her live was too big of a risk. Blocking her hands and mouth wouldn't stop her from using first magic, nor he had any idea what kind of artifacts she could use against him if given the chance. By clenching his fist, Lith lifted Barut in the air before crushing her head. After checking there was no enemy still alive, Lith gave out a victory laughter. I can't believe I'm still alive. It's the first time I had to gamble so much. These guys' strength and teamwork was insane. Who the heck were they? I don't know, and I don't care. Solus was brimming with joy. The only important thing is that you are well and all in one piece. Well, almost. What do you mean with almost? Your hair. Lith's hand ran over his head, discovering that he was almost bald. With invigoration, he assessed that his hair had almost been burned down to the root. How'd I get them back the last time? Manohar, Solus said, like it explained it all. Looking at himself, Lith discovered that most of his uniform was gone. Between the cuts and the burns, he was as good as naked. After a quick change in farmer's clothes, he realized he had another problem. Solus, do you have any idea where we are? No. What about you? Well, I know that moss grows on the north side of the trees. Yeah, too bad this is a grassland. She sneered, and I was being sarcastic. Without a landmark, maps are useless. We could be anywhere between the Academy and Candria. Yeah, I think we should run for our life. Lith didn't know what Solus had noticed, but didn't stop for asking. He moved as fast as he could, casting a flight spell to get the higher ground. The corpses of the Talons exploded, leaving nothing behind. My loot, Lith screamed. As soon as you killed that woman, I noticed something had changed in the mana surrounding their equipment. At first, I thought it was some kind of protection that was being depowered by the user's death, but then I noticed that instead of decreasing, the energy was actually overloading. They sure were a careful lot. Who cares about that? All this work for nothing. Did you just dare to call your life nothing? Solus sounded really angry. Yes. I mean, no. Damn, where the heck are we? Lith decided to change topic. After thinking a bit about their predicament, they decided the first thing to do was to get away from the fighting scene. Lith would have a hard time to justify how a team of 6 experts had died, while a simple student had survived. The simplest explanation was to say he had no idea what had happened to the core after they had helped him escape from unknown assailants. The self-destruction mechanism had undoubtedly hurt his pockets, but at least helped covering what had really happened. In a battle involving the core, the fact that so many of the dead bodies had broken necks and exploded heads instead of weapon marks would have stuck out like a sore thumb. If you think about it, it's a blessing in disguise. Solus pointed out, if the equipment remained along with the bodies and you looted it, there was no possible way to justify how a naked unit could fight on par with the core. Lith didn't reply, but only because he understood she was trying to cheer him up. It would have been quite easy for him to make the best equipped members of the Talons disappear and stage a more balanced clash. After flying for a while in the direction he supposed was south-southeast, getting even more lost, Lith landed near a group of trees. There, he took out his uniform, hoping for its self-repair magic to make it less tattered. At that point, all he had to do was waiting for someone to notice he had disappeared. First, he ate a lot of food from his reserve to make up for the body mass lost after healing such extensive wounds. Then Lith spent the following hours using accumulation. While refining his mana core, Lith reflected on the battle, analyzing all he had discovered about Tier 5 magic, searching for a way to reproduce it, but most importantly how to defend from it. Chapter 140. Tier 5 magic was much stronger than he had anticipated, making all the other spells he had learned so far look like parlor tricks. From what Lith had understood, Tier 5 was capable of borrowing a huge amount of world energy. No matter how strong a mana core was, just conjuring once those purple flames should have left the mage exhausted. Yet the sorceress seemed perfectly fine. To be able to cast such spell twice in a short amount of time meant that the burden on her body was limited. We have to learn a way to do the same. Otherwise, the next time it happens, if our opponent is a little stronger or luckier, we'll be done for. After a couple hours, he had yet to find a solution, but his communication amulet finally activated. It wasn't like a phone. It didn't ring or buzz. When there was an incoming call, the user would experience a pull to his consciousness, like when you suddenly remember something important. It was a feeling strong enough to wake someone up from the deepest slumber. Lith didn't answer immediately. He wanted to give the impression of having been unconscious. Lith, thanks the gods you are all right. As predicted, it was Linjo's. I've tried reaching Captain Vallegros, but to no avail. What happened to you? Why you have yet to reach Candria? Headmaster, Lith replied, squinting his eyes, acting confused, like he had just woken up. Good God, Lith, what happened to your uniform? Before answering, he had changed back to make his story more believable. Lith took a long pause, like he was trying to remember. Oh gods, the captain and his soldiers are in danger. They need help. You must hurry. He seemed to be panicking, stuttering at every word, his face going pale thanks to a little spell. Calm down, son. Take a deep breath. Lith did as instructed, and after a while, he was able to tell Linjo's what had happened. In his version of the story, instead of using warp steps, the enemies had emerged from underground. The last thing Lith remembered was being hit by some purple flames before losing consciousness. Purple flames? Linjo's was shocked. I know very few spells capable of generating such destructive force. That would explain a lot. The captain must have used something to save you, but the damage sustained was too much and you have blacked out. Then, he has brought you to safety before going back to the fight. Lith gasped, nodding at the headmaster's words. When playing the I don't know card, it was always better let the other party to fill the blanks. The less details he gave, the smaller the chances of contradicting himself. Are you alone right now? Lith looked left and right at his surroundings before answering. Yes, and I have no idea where I am. The only thing I know for sure is that this isn't the same place where we got attacked. What do I do now? You can't stay there. It's too dangerous. At this point, it is safe to assume that Captain Vallegros is either dead or incapacitated. If he is dead, it means that the attackers could still be looking for you. After pondering for a moment, Linjo's spoke again. Follow the setting sun toward west. Unless the captain warped you really far, you will find the river Delilin. Following the river, you are bound to find some settlement. Don't say you are going to Candria. Despite the information blackout, everyone in the region knows something is wrong with it. You would raise suspicions, ask for directions, but for the city of Pabia. It's outside the quarantine zone, but close to Candria and well connected with the main trading routes. Road signs will help you reach your real destination. Notify me as soon as you arrive. Lith nodded. Then he hung up the call before taking flight. We already knew of the river from the maps. Linjo's plan is identical to our own, except we would have directly asked for Candria. Why did you ask for his help? Sola's question made Lith sigh. She was still too naive. Because I'm supposed to be a 12-year-old, shocked by an ambush from which I barely survived. I need to appear vulnerable and confused, not like a cold-blooded machine. Lith followed Linjo's instructions, easily finding the Delilin River first and a farm later. Thanks to a stroke of luck, while looking for Pabia, he arrived on the main road. After that, reaching the outskirts of Candria was just a matter of minutes. Thanks to life vision, Lith was able to see the otherwise invisible energy lines in the space in front of him, stretching beyond the barricades and roadblocks that were still far away. It's similar to the array used by those assassins to trap the core squad, but much more powerful and complicated, Solus observed. I suspect that it can do much more than just block air and dimensional magic. I've never seen anything like this before, but based on what we read from the file and your memories from Earth, I'd say it's safe to assume that it can block communications too. It would make sense. Lith agreed, while his mind was spinning. If Solus was right, and he would have bet good money on it, he was about to throw himself into the wolf's maws. There were countless things that could go wrong once he was isolated from the outside world. His paranoia required at least a dozen of contingency plans for a situation like that, but he actually had only one. Lith informed Linjo's of his arrival, making sure to leave a record of his position. Traitors weren't the only ones he had to watch out for. There were also the relatives and friends of all those he had crossed during his time in the White Griffin. Lith knew that for many of them, he was a stain on their pride and reputation. Normally, no one would dare to touch a prize student, but a quarantine zone was a place where laws and common sense held little value. Those who considered commoners like pebbles would inevitably be tempted to cause accidents. Being without a detail further complicated the situation. There was no one that he knew or that he could trust, and being the sole survivor was bound to raise suspicions. It didn't matter if they were genuine or a matter of opportunity. Someone could try to pin their deaths to him. I'll inform the supervisor and the queen of your arrival. Get close to the perimeter, but do not attempt to enter on your own. The soldiers have strict orders. The plague has put everyone's nerves on edge. Use your uniform as proof of identity. I'll call you later. Linjos is a good man. After all, calling the queen means he has his fair share of doubts too, and is trying to avoid unnecessary troubles. Even from that distance, Lith could see how heavily guarded the zone was. There was a 10 meters 33 feet high wall that circled the area as far as the eye could see. Life vision showed him that many soldiers and a few mages were hidden behind it. Lith flew forward at full speed, pretending to not know what was going to happen. As soon as he entered the array, his spell disappeared, making him fall to the ground. Lith had tried to soften the landing, but even low-tier earth magic seemed to be blocked. The impact left him breathless, and before he could stand up, someone pushed him back to the ground, binding his hands, while several blades grazed his neck, puncturing even his unnaturally hard skin. Small droplets of blood started to flow towards his head. Man, I hate being always right. Chapter 141. Who are you? What are you doing here? Said a raspy voice coming from behind Lith's back. I'm Lith from Lucia, coming from the White Griffin Academy on Her Majesty's service. Lith appeared to be calm, but he was actually seething with anger. He had expected for someone to come and identify him, not to be treated like a criminal. Really? The voice sneered. Then why are you dressed like a farmer? Since when the White Griffin has stooped so low that they can't even afford uniforms anymore? For a moment, Lith was tempted to break the ropes with brute strength and then pull their guts through their mouths. Stay calm, you idiot. This isn't your village or the academy. In the outside world, you are a nobody, and you'll be treated as such. My uniform got heavily damaged. He replied calmly. What's left of it is on my shoulder. Headmaster Linjos should have already contacted your supervisor. Someone searched him, while another hand picked the rag that was his uniform. Being on his finger, Solus could see one of the 3 robed magicians cast a spell. It made Lith and the uniform emit a light glow at the same time. The mages looked at each other, nodding, before letting Lith stand up. Amazing. It seems there is a way to make apparent the link between a magic object and the one it is imprinted with. Lith didn't share her enthusiasm. He was more interested in looking at his captors. There were 5 soldiers and 3 mages. They were all of different heights and builds, but were dressed almost in the same way. They were all clearly part of a military unit. They all wore leather boots, gray linen pants and shirt, leather gloves, and what resembled a plague doctor mask, making their faces unrecognizable. The only differences between them was that the mages wore a robe, while the soldiers had weapons and a thin metal breastplate. Sorry, sir, said one of the soldiers, his voice distorted by the mask. But this is not enough proof of identity. No one gets in or out of the quarantine zone without the proper clearance. One of the mages took out a communication amulet, from which emerged the small hologram of a handsome man in his late 30s. He had thick blonde hair and beard, with the stern look typical of someone being used to complete obedience. Why did you leave your post, Sergeant? We had a perimeter breach, sir. We are currently dealing with it. The way they had pronounced that word, not referring at him like a person, but as a thing, sounded ominous to Lith's ears. Is it perhaps a tall kid, dressed like a farmer, with a bald head and a tattered White Griffin uniform? If the sergeant was surprised by the accurate description, he didn't let it show. Exactly, sir. Bring him to me. Lith used that short exchange to use invigoration on the ropes binding his hands. They had no enchantment whatsoever, and that let him sigh with relief. If necessity arose, he could easily free himself. One of the mages took out gloves and a plague mask from under his robe, making Lith wear them. The beak-like mask had 2 small holes, from which the air would enter at every breath, making a hissing sound. Lith had the impression of having lost his sense of smell. The air didn't carry any scent anymore, except for that of some kind of disinfectant. This thing must be some sort of gas mask, he thought. The situation must be much worse than I expected If even this far from Candria, no one dares to move without it. The soldiers positioned themselves so that 2 walked in front of Lith, 2 behind, together with the mages, and 1 alongside him, keeping the ropes in check. Once they got past the checkpoint, Lith could see a military encampment the size of a small city station behind the wall. It was comprised by several tents divided in 2 blocks. One block had only circular-shaped tents of various height and size, but none bigger than a house. The other block was situated farther inside. It was heavily guarded as the wall itself, and it was comprised only by large rectangular-shaped tents. The smallest one was at least 100 square meters big. Each tent of the encampment had small flags near its entrance, probably to indicate its purpose. Lith was led to one of the small circular tents, about 2.5 meters, 8.2 feet, high with a diameter of 5 meters, 16.5 feet, marked with triangular golden flags. The space inside was perfectly lit, thanks to glowing gems masterfully placed on the ceiling. The floor was entirely covered by a thick carpet that muffled their footstep. Seated behind a hardwood desk, there was the man Lith had previously seen in the hologram. To his right, there was a man around 1.9 meters, 6 feet 3 inches high, with shoulder-length pitch black hair and ice-blue eyes. He wore a corps uniform identical to the one Vallegros used. Lith deduced he had to be a captain too. The soldiers left him in the middle of the tent without freeing his hands, and then left. The moment the curtain closed between them, the rattling sound their weapons produced at every step disappeared. The tent was clearly soundproof. Damn, what the heck is happening? I'm supposed to be an esteemed guest, not a prisoner. Lith was getting more nervous with every second, but he could only grin and bear it. May I know what I did to deserve such treatment? He asked, walking towards the 2 men. Silence. I asked the questions here. The blond man stood up, slamming his fist on the desk. Lith felt a powerful air current pressing on him from above, trying to make him kneel. Lith bent a little under the force of the spell, but refused to submit. His rebelliousness angered his captor even more. The man waved his hand, and Lith felt like an invisible punch had just struck his jaw, making him fall on the ground. The corps' captain stiffened up, but said nothing. Now tell me what happened to Vallegros and his men. The blond man's eyes were reduced to fiery slits. Lith stood up before repeating to him the same story he had told Linjos, how they had departed from the White Griffin, get ambushed by unknown assailants, until he was struck by the purple flames and had lost consciousness. Lith was forced to repeat his story again and again, but he never contradicted himself. When a man's anger peaked and was about to hit Lith again, the captain stopped his hand. That's enough, Colonel Vergrave. The boy has already answered to your questions. I will not allow any further harassment to our esteemed guest. Despite the captain's lean build, Vergrave was incapable of escaping his grasp. Let me go immediately, Captain Killian. This is a military operation, and this is my camp. I only answer to the king. Killian refused to back down, twisting Vergrave's arm and forcing to look at him in the eyes. Make no mistake, you'll answer to him. This is a violation of the protocol, and you are acting on groundless accusations. Vergrave snorted. Do you really want me to believe that a man like Vallegros died, that his whole team was wiped out, and that traitorous runt managed to come out unscathed? Isn't it suspicious? Anger twisted his visage, baring his teeth at every word. I know that you and Vallegros were blood brothers, but nothing you do can bring him back. Now listen to reason, and let the healer go. Not until I have my answers. Vergrave snarled. Seeing that reasoning was impossible, Killian took out his communication amulet. Not even a second later, an unknown visage appeared from it that made Vergrave turn pale. Tell me you have good news, Killian, said the man from the amulet. Sadly no, my king. Yet there is a matter that requires your attention. Lith inwardly smiled, seeing Vergrave's face twitch as Killian reported everything that had happened. The king turned towards Lith, that only then realized he could actually see him, and promptly kneeled. No need for formalities, Mage Lith stand up. By acknowledging his name and title of mage, despite Lith was just a student, The king was doing him a huge honor. Lith knew it and kept kneeling for a couple of seconds before standing up. "Thanks, Your Majesty." "Killian, take Mage Lith to the hospital. There is much to do, and you have already wasted too much of his time. Vergrave, and I need to have a talk. Please, leave us alone." Killian bowed and untied Lith's hands. Then the two of them wore their mask and exited from the tent. "My king, please forgive my rudeness. Why are you letting him go? He is nothing but a traitorous commoner that has caused the death of many loyal servants of the crown. And even if he didn't, what could he possibly do? He's just a kid. How can he succeed where the best healers of the kingdom have failed? It's impossible. I would bet my life on it." The king silently stared at him for a second before replying. "I'll take that bet." Chapter 142. Once out of Vergrave's tent, Lith introduced himself to Captain Killian Illyria. He discovered that the ranks in the Queen's Corps were different from the army. Being elite squads, each unit was allowed to act independently and was composed by 5 soldiers and 1 captain. Each captain only answered to the Queen herself, so despite their low-key demeanor, both Killian and Vallegros were actually big shots. Killian tried explaining to Lith how Vergrave had been grief-stricken ever since he learned about Vallegros' alleged death. The two of them had started their military career together and been through thick and thin for years before their paths had diverged. Lith politely nodded from time to time, grateful to the mask for hiding his uncaring expression. He knew a thing or two about grief and loss, yet he had never attacked someone based on a simple suspicion. In his mind, Vergrave's destiny was set in stone. He would use his success in the current task to ask for compensation as part of his reward. If that resulted impossible or too problematic in the short term, Lith would simply postpone. He had always considered revenge as something that was best served cold. There was no rush for it. After asking Lith to forgive Vergrave and Lith pretending to consider doing it, Killian led him toward the second block. The first block is where soldiers and personnel live. The second, instead, is where the hospitals and the research labs are located. We have healers and alchemists trying to treat the victims of the plague that we managed to stabilize, or at least that was the plan. The truth is that even after a month, no one has yet understood what the plague really is. So far, light magic is completely useless, while alchemy seems to work to some degree, but only as palliative care. It treats the symptoms, not the cause. The more Lith learned about the plague, the more it resembled one of his old medical cases. He was confident to be able to offer both a diagnosis and a cure, for a proper reward, of course. Just out of curiosity, he asked, "In the first block, triangular flags mean a residential tent, right? Then what does the diamond and rectangular flag stand for? What do you think?" Despite having read his file, Killian was still surprised that even in his earlier circumstances, Lith had the presence of mind to notice small details. "Well, since in here dimensional items do not work, I'd say one is for the food supplies and the other is for the weaponry." "Correct. And in case you were wondering, the golden flag is for the commanding officer, silver for the officers, bronze for soldiers." Lith tried to take out his communication amulet, but to no avail. Space was tightly sealed inside the array, negating access to his pocket dimension. Then he tried to use first magic, discovering that even elemental magic didn't work. The array jammed the connection between pure mana and the world energy, leaving him almost powerless. I also noticed earlier that magic and magical objects do not work in here. Yet the colonel didn't have trouble smacking me around, and you were able to contact the king. How was it possible? Killian smirked at that naive question. He had almost forgot their esteemed guest was only a kid, with no knowledge about powerful artifacts. The array surrounding Candria is not a worn spell. Otherwise, it would make no distinction between friends and foes. It is created by one of the crown's treasures, called Small World. As the name implies, it creates an extended space within which the one that holds its keystone can change the rules of magic at will. The colonel controls the artifact, so he is immune to its effects and can grant privileges to others. But every time someone uses a privilege, he is immediately notified. That's how he knew something had happened the second the guards used warp steps to surround you. Lith was flabbergasted by the infinite uses and applications such an artifact could have. That's the most overpowered thing I ever heard about. I really hope your tower form has something similar. Me too, Solus replied. But I bet it's not as easy as he says. The affected area is too big and the effect too powerful. The captain is probably just feeding us public information while avoiding to mention the costs and limitations of the artifact. Lith sighed. She may have burst his bubble, but was probably right. It was too good to be true. He decided to drop the matter and concentrate on his task. Don't worry, Killian added. Light magic can be freely used inside this small world. You don't need to ask the colonel's permission. After they got past the security, Killian brought him to Block 2's largest tent. It was big enough to easily accommodate a whole circus. It was a field hospital, the interior of which was completely white. Instead of walls, it had countless curtains that had been arranged, creating corridors and defining the space of each patient's room. The first thing that Lith noticed about it was the silence. Aside from the conversations between the mages coming and going into the various rooms, the hospital was completely silent. One could hear the patient's moans and complaints only when a curtain was opened. All the field hospitals have curtains enchanted to be soundproof. Killian explained. It's needed for security and morale reasons. Despite being heavily sedated, some patients are in constant pain. Their screams would disturb the healers and stress the other residents. Avoiding escape attempts and mass hysteria is a priority. All the field hospitals? Lith echoed. Do you mean there's more than one? There had to be hundreds of patients in that tent alone. Lith had underestimated the scale of the plague. Suddenly, he felt his conscience stinging at him. It was Solus, of course. Killian brought him to a patient, a middle-aged man whose right leg was split open like a watermelon. Despite the bandages and the attempts to stitch it, it was constantly bleeding. According to the chart, he hadn't much time left. There weren't enough blood potions and mages for everyone. Without constantly replenishing his vitality, he had only a few days at most. In Lith's eyes, this was the easiest to solve among the plague's manifestations. It was identical to what had happened to Marchioness de Star's daughter. Lith even had a fake magic spell he had later created, in case it happened again, and the Marchioness was willing to purchase it from him. Selling it to the kingdom will be much more lucrative. Lith thought. The man was pale as a ghost, his body covered in sweat. The prolonged pain had sapped his strength. He barely opened an eye when the two strangers entered. Lith pretended to chant a spell, and then placed his hand on the man's balding forehead, activating invigoration. He didn't like at all what he saw. His confidence crumbled. Captain, can I use darkness magic too? Killian nodded, noticing that Lith carefully wiped out the sweat with magic before moving forward. He rushed Killian, visiting several patients with open wounds, but his findings were always the same. Then, he visited the survivors from the spontaneous combustion and freezing phenomenon, and despite the mass, Killian could tell that something was wrong. Lith was becoming increasingly nervous, like he had never seen him, not even during Vergrave's violent interrogation. Killian stopped, grabbing Lith's shoulder, executing with only one hand a spell that created a small air dome around them. Not only he can use air magic despite the array. Killian even invented the Mage Knight version of my Hush spell. The idea of being plagiarized temporarily suppressed Lith's worry. These people are the official reason you and us are here. Off the record, though, reality is far more cynical. If word spread that we have a disease capable of stripping a mage of his powers, our neighbors would join forces and burn the Griffin Kingdom to the ground. I believe that even most mages, nobles or not, would run away at any cost, to not lose years of painstaking work and dedication. That's why the final wing of the hospital officially does not exist. Is it clear? Only after Lith nodded, Killian brought him into an empty room. He then placed an open hand on the curtain, injecting mana into it. The surface became covered in runes, and after Killian murmured an unintelligible word, he pulled it open. Lith discovered they weren't in the field hospital anymore, but in another much smaller tent without any exit. Dimensional magic, Killian explained. The tent had no curtains, except for the one they had come from. It was filled with beds where men and women lied. Their faces were ashen. Many were sobbing like they had recently lost their true love. They were all members of the Mage Association that had lost their powers. When they saw Lith using magic on them, some started crying uncontrollably. Others tried to assault him in a fit of rage, forcing Killian and the soldiers stationed inside to intervene to protect him from the angry mob. After they left the prison ward, Lith couldn't wait to get the heck out of there. "Thank you for your help, Killian. For a moment, I thought they would rip me apart." "Don't mention it." His voice oozed over eagerness. "What do you think of the plague?" Killian steeled himself, preparing for his hopes to be crushed once again. "It's not a plague. It's much worse. To whom must I report to before going back to the academy?" "Are you saying you've already cracked it?" Chapter 143. Cracked is a big word. Understanding its nature is one thing. Curing it is another entirely. Lith tried to curb Killian's enthusiasm. Killian seemed to not have listened to a word he said, dragging him away by the arm at full speed while frantically speaking to someone with his communicator amulet. For some reason, Lith's mind recalled all the times he had seen Manohar pulled around by Marth like a small child. Walking a mile in his shoes wasn't pleasant at all. Before he could realize what had happened, Lith found himself back in the colonel's tent. Much to his surprise, Vergrave was kneeling at him. Lith sneered at that sight, thinking that maybe the colonel wasn't such a bad man if he was willing to humble himself to that point after realizing how wrong he had been. "Your Majesty, Lith from Lustria is ready to report his discoveries," Killian said after falling on his knee. It was only at that point that Lith turned around, discovering that on the floor behind him lied a blue gemstone that was projecting a life-size hologram of the king, a woman, and several youths that only a blind man could not recognize as their offspring. Judging from the number of crowns in front of him, Lith was about to share his discoveries with the whole royal family. Thanks to the etiquette books stored in Solaspedia, he knew what to do. Lith backstepped until he was lined up with the other two men and kneeled, barely holding in laughter. To think that after almost triggering a civil war because of their incompetence in handling some power-hungry nobles, these royal idiots need the help of a 12 years old to clean their own mess. Pathetic. Wearing a mask had been liberating for Lith. With it, he didn't need to hide his thoughts and emotions. Yet, even if behind thick crystals, his eyes were still almost visible. In them, the king didn't see awe, respect, or nervousness like he would have expected from commoner child, but only contempt and amusement, like it was just a game that he was winning. "Take off your mask and gloves, Mage Lith. I assure you that Colonel Vergrave's apartments are safe," the king ordered. Despite the king's tone was calm and his expression amiable, Lith seemed to perceive a tinge of anger in him. Maybe it's just my full-blown paranoia, maybe not. "Better play safe." Lith obeyed, removing the protections. Looking at the kid's serious and brooding expression, the king realized that all the accumulated stress of those last few months was pushing him on edge to the point of seeing things. "Please share your findings with us. What so far has been considered a plague is actually something much worse." Lith started to explain. "Do you remember what happened to Marchioness de Star's daughter a few years ago? She fell victim to a magically laced poison that disrupted the effects of light magic, turning any attempt to cure it into a new wound." "That's impossible," the queen interrupted him. "We already noticed the similarities with that case. The antidote for that kind of poison has already been tested and proven useless. That's because there isn't a plague that manifests itself in 4 different ways. There are actually 4 different plagues, and all of them are man-made. I believe that whoever created that poison years ago has learned his lesson and stepped up his game. From what I could infer, the plagues are a miracle of alchemy. The weak point of the poison was its being static. Instead of spreading into the bloodstream, it was designed to remain in the place it was injected to not lose its potency. Hence, once identified, it could be easily removed. But the plagues that are affecting this area aren't that simple." Both the king and the queen knitted their brows. From what they remembered, that poison had escaped the detection of many expert healers. The only reason it had been later discovered a method to identify and treat it was because Lith had extracted the poison without degrading it, that had allowed to conduct long and extensive analysis to understand its nature. The fact that he earnestly used the word simple to describe such a nightmare was the first silver lining in the brewing storm that threatened to sweep away the Griffin Kingdom. Maybe he can become a leading figure in the field of poisons, just like Professor Duke Marth did when he had his age, but in the field of regeneration. Crazy or not, we cannot afford to lose such talent. The Queen's line of thought was shared with her spouse via a mind link that allowed them to comment and discuss any matter. Even if they often quarreled, no one could tell, since they would deliberate only after reaching an agreement. This time they were on the same page, yet the consequences of it burdened the king's mind. There would be much to talk about later. The plagues, Lith continued, are not static, nor act like any illness I have ever seen before. They all work the same way. Once the host is infected, they spread to the whole body and remain dormant until magic is used. At that point, they alter the mana flow, making it chaotic. The effects are devastating, if not lethal. If it's not a poison or a plague, then what is it? The king asked. It's a very small parasite, barely the size of a needle. As long as the host is alive, it keeps spawning. I found eggs in all the patient's bodily fluids, sweat included. I don't know if physical contact is enough or if it needs an open wound to be transmitted. The one thing I'm sure is that it mustn't be allowed to spread. A parasite? The Queen was flabbergasted. Then how come no one else managed to detect them? Because normally, diagnostic spells look for something wrong with the patient's body. A broken bone, a malfunctioning organ, and so on. In this case, the patient is perfectly fine until he tries to use magic. A healer will be able to detect common parasites, either sensing their life force, or because they suck the nutrients out of the host. In this case, their small size, coupled with their ability to mess with mana, make them hard to find, unless the healer, like me, is capable of perceiving even small alterations in the human body. Also, I have noticed no tissue degeneration near the parasites. The only explanation I can find, albeit is only a guess, is that they feed on mana. For several seconds, no one spoke. Everyone in the room was struggling to accept those revelations. Killian was worried for the people, while Vergrave, although sharing his feelings, was also concerned about his neck. Can you find a cure? The king's face was composed, but his hands were squeezing the armrests of his throne hard enough to break his nails. No, Lith admitted with a sigh, throwing those present into despair. I'm just a student, after all. I never worked on something so big. When it comes down to research, I wouldn't know where to start. Actually, Lith believed that given enough time, he could cure anything with true magic and invigoration. But this case was different from all the others he had faced before. There wasn't a single patient, but hundreds if not thousands of them. Not only he would never been able to cure them all in time by himself, but also the parasites were clearly a biological weapon. If he declared he could cure it, any sane ruler would have demanded him to share his method, offering any sum for compensation. Lith wasn't willing to teach true magic, and was not skilled enough to convert an elaborate spell and fake magic for anyone to learn with so little time at hand. The king and the queen looked at each other before issuing their order. Well done, Mage Lith. The royal family clapped their hands, almost making him feel guilty for his deception. Almost. You have brilliantly fulfilled your part of the agreement. Rest assured the crown will do the same. Thank you, Your Majesty. It pains me, but your kingdom requires a further sacrifice from you, for the greater good. You will remain in Candria, and use the best of your abilities in developing a cure for this monstrosity. What? Lith was so shocked that his expression almost revealed the shock and outrage seething within him. Almost. You are the one that discovered the truth about this accident. I'm sure that even with your limited experience, you will be able to offer your guidance and help. Do not worry about the Academy. At this point, we can only declare the state of national emergency and call all hands on deck. We need the help of all the light magic specialists to solve this situation as fast as possible. From today onward, all the 6 great academies will suspend their activities until a cure is found. Chapter 144. Lith didn't like at all the turn the events had taken. In hindsight, it was an easily predictable outcome. Driven by his desire to stand out among the masses, he had provided them too much information, giving them hope. His plan to give them just enough to solve the problem on their own, letting him go back to his daily life, had actually backfired. Damn, I'd underestimated them because of my Earth standards. Back in my world, any prime minister would have turned this scenario into a black op, removing the threat in front of him with extreme prejudice. Instead, they're willing to put everything at risk to save these people. They could have just turned the infects into guinea pigs, using their bodies, dead or alive, for research purposes. Since no one outside this room knows that we made a breakthrough, the king continued, I hereby decree all the new information pertaining to the crisis and their source a state secret. We will divulge them bit by bit once all our assets are in place, using a cover story to avoid Mage Lith becoming a target. Officially, he'll be here only as a consultant. He will convey any further findings only to Captain Killian, which in turn will share them with the other healers. The 3 men nodded, yet Lith kept racking his brain to find a way out. If I refuse, best case scenario, I will get expelled from the academy and my family will lose the Corps' protection. Heck, I'd be lucky to avoid being charged of treason. I would be alone versus the crown, the nobles that I offended in the past, and whoever sent those mercenaries to kill me. If their contactor didn't hesitate despite I already was under the Queen's umbrella, there's no telling what he'll do next. Once again, I can only grin and bear it. The only silver lining is that if I get properly rewarded, I'll not have money problems for the rest of my life. Before we proceed any further, I'd like to know why Mage Lith thinks these parasites are a product of alchemy. Queen Sylpha's curiosity had been piqued by that particular statement, since she shared the same opinion. Because I can't think about any other mean to infuse magic in a poison or parasite. He lied through his teeth. One of the details he had not shared was that the worm-like parasites he had identified didn't alter the mana flow directly, but by secreting an unknown substance. Not only that made them living alchemic labs, but was also deviously brilliant. Even with invigoration, Lith had struggled to overcome the mana distortion effect and identify the real source of the trouble. Any other mage would have fallen for that trick, devising a spell to cleanse the toxin, only for the healed patient to fall ill again in a matter of days. The reason why even Lith would need time to cure the plague was that first he needed to find a way to remove the toxins without killing the patient, and then remove the parasite safely. He suspected that killing them while inside the host, or removing them forcibly, would prove to be lethal for the infected. Also, I read from the Captain Vallegro's file that the plague spread right after the explosion of Corn Haytorn's alchemic lab. I think it's highly unlikely for it to be a coincidence. The Queen nodded, disappointed from the answer. She had hoped for more brilliance and less logic, more Manohar and less Marth. Geniuses were hard to come by, and even harder to keep. As for you, Colonel Vergrave, the Queen's voice was filled with ill-restrained wrath. If glares could cut, the Colonel would have already been turned in pieces not bigger than a postmark. I hope you haven't forgotten your bet with the King, because certainly I have not. Your earlier blunder is inexcusable. The only reason why you'll keep your rank and position is because we cannot afford the time to change the ownership of the small world. When the current emergency will be solved, prepare to face the consequences of your foolishness. This conversation is far from over. The conversation ended so abruptly that Killian checked the gemstone to make sure the magical item wasn't broken. The truth, though, was quite different. I told you not to mention the bet. King Marone still couldn't believe his fiery wife had forced him to hang up the call. We had yet to listen to Litha's requests and find a way to sweeten the deal. In case you forgot, we need more than his services, we need his loyalty. We have to correct the situation as soon as possible, otherwise he will resent us and leave the kingdom. In my book, putting that Vergrave moron in his place sweetens the deal a lot. Sylpha retorted, this time, we will do things my way. I want him dead. He is a loyal servant of the crown. Her bloodlust would never cease to amaze Marone. You can't kill him off just for one mistake. It would set a terrible example. It would be a great example. He disobeyed a direct order and endangered everything because he wasn't able to keep his emotion in check. What if Killian wasn't there to stop him? What if next time he loses it, we lose another great mage for good? Phoenix. The king stood up from the throne, like he always did after losing an argument. Do you think this Lith is an awakened one? He asked after a while. Unlikely, but possible. We had high hopes for Haytorn and Manohar too, but they turned out to be normal mages. Being a genius and being an awakened one are two different things. We'll have to send Lady Tyrus to check on him. It's the only way to be certain. Hundreds of kilometers away, Archmage Lockhart trashed his desk in a fit of rage. What do you mean? The Talons have been wiped out. Exactly what I said, sir. The voice from the communication amulet belonged to one of the few surviving members of the mercenary unit that hadn't taken part in the latest assignment. Their dog tags have activated, and that can only mean that there were no survivors. It's impossible. Lockhart still refused to accept the news. They were 11 versus only 6 members of the Corps, and with the element of surprise. How is it possible? We'll investigate, the voice coldly replied, but we will not follow up on the matter. The mission was an utter failure. We now lack the manpower for a second attempt. Your information was clearly lacking of fake, otherwise a complete wipeout would have never happened. At least give me back my money. I could have bought a whole castle with that sum. The voice hung up the call without even answering. Suddenly, Lockhart felt lightheaded and dizzy. Everything was spiraling out of his control. The fall of the White Griffin Academy was just a small step in his master plan. Contrary to what his associates believed, his endgame had never been privileges, but the crown itself. Lockhart wanted from the beginning the Civil War to happen. It was the only way to trigger a war with the neighboring countries. At that point, the only thing he had to do was to unleash the plagues that Haytorn had spent years to develop and for which he had been handsomely paid. The water parasite would have crippled the Blood Desert tribes, forcing them to surrender or die. The mana parasite, instead, would have neutralized the Gorgon Empire magical army, without which they had no defenses. First, he would have repelled the invaders, looking like a hero in the eyes of the people, becoming king by acclamation. Then, he would use them a weapon to bring all the 3 great countries under his heel. But now, because of that witch's paranoia, the lab was blown to bits, spreading the eggs in the wind. He could only hope that no one would discover their existence, that the crown would just kill the infected without finding a cure. Manohar was the only mage whose genius was on Haytorn level. With him out of the picture, Lookhart's plan was supposed to be safe. What can a little runt do, after all? Chapter 145. After the king had been forced to hung up the call to the quarantine zone, many things had yet to happen before that long day came to an end. Using fatigue as an excuse, Lith was escorted to his new apartments. It was a small one-man tent, around 2 meters, 6.6 feet, high with a diameter of barely 3 meters, 10 foot. It was completely bare outside for a bed and a nightstand. It was the smallest accommodation he had ever had. The only redeeming feature was that at least he had some privacy. Unless they shoved in a sleeping bag, there was no way another person could fit. The first thing he did was to check his powers. As expected, all kinds of elemental magic besides light and darkness seemed to be jammed for both fake and true magic. But while fake magic simply gave no results, with true magic he could feel an obstruction. It was like touching an object through plastic wrap. He could still feel the world energy all around him, but was unable to reach it with conventional means. Lith had no idea how the small world worked, but was quite confident that in case of need, he still would be able to use magic if he pushed forward strong enough to overcome the invisible barrier. The problem is the degree of awareness the artifact grants to Vergrave. There's a strong possibility that successful true magic, if not even my attempts, could be detected. It's best to keep it as a last resort. Much to his satisfaction, both spirit magic and fusion magic worked without a hitch. Either the forge master that crafted the small world was a fake mage, or he had left loopholes on purpose to not fall victim of his own creation. Lith sighed, Whatever was the answer, it was still a small comfort, compared to the realization he was losing control over his life, becoming a puppet in games he had no interest into. You know, Solus, this may as well be the worst day of my third life. First, I was taken away from the academy, then I almost got killed, and now I have been declared a state secret. All in one day. Just imagine what could happen tomorrow. It's not like they kidnapped you. They offered you a job, and you took it. Solus didn't believe her own words. She was just trying to lighten the mood. She knew that as long as they lived in any country, there would always be offers that couldn't be refused. After that, things have got unpleasant, but at least you should be rewarded for your services. You may even get a nice home and a noble title. Are you kidding me? He snorted. That would be the worst. If I get to choose, I'll pick money, hands down. A title would mean having underlings, responsibilities, becoming an active part of the system from which I'm trying to escape from day one. Not to mention being forced to attend social life, marry, and take part in politics. He slammed his hand on the nightstand, making it sink a couple of centimeters in the soft ground. Damn it, I never wanted to be a hero, nor to conquer this SHTTY world. My aim has always been to find a fix to my reincarnation problem, and then live a happy and quiet life. Now, instead, I'm on the verge of being recognized by the crown itself. And if that happened, my family will always be used as a leverage against me. I can already feel the shackles around my body getting tighter and tighter. But what options do I have? Kill my own family just to not have any more ties? And then what? Live all my life as the monster I would become, alone, spending all my life running and fighting like a mad dog? What's the point in having all this F-King power for if I can't even protect the only 4 people I do care about? Away from home, away from his friends, Lith had never felt so helpless and alone. Once again, Solus crashed against her condition. She knew that it was in those rare moments when Lith was showing himself vulnerable that holding his hand or simply holding him tight would help him get rid of the walls he had built to protect himself. But she was just a piece of rock with a voice, and there was nothing that mere words could do. Lith had spent his first life going from a hardship to another, with people telling him to stay strong, that all will be well. Now, as then, he didn't need consolation. Lith needed someone capable of standing by his side and help him facing the incoming tide. Because of the small world, she was incapable of changing shape or even using her dimensional pocket. Solus felt useless, wishing for a second to be just a mindless tool, to not be forced seeing the suffering of those she loved, and yet being unable to offer any comfort. In the Colonel's tent, Vergrave and Killian were planning the future ahead of them while drinking dragon water, one of the strongest and most expensive liquors available in the Griffin Kingdom, with an alcohol content nearing 50%. Killian was listening to several reports from his team, while Vergrave was revising his last will. The kid's story checks out. The scouts have found where Vallegro's last battle should have taken place. There are indeed signs of the use of purple flames. Whoever the attackers were, they weren't willing to take risks. Any survivors? Vergrave asked as a formality, without raising his eyes or stopping the quill. None. Seriously, I can't believe you were able to write your testament with such a straight face. Vergrave drank his glass in one gulp before refilling it. I'm a soldier, old friend. I know very well I made a mistake allowing personal matters to intrude in my duty, and I'm ready to bear the consequences. Vergrave raised his glass in a small toast before emptying it again. That, and 5 glasses of water dragon can turn any mouse into a lion. Otherwise, I would be already SH'ing my pants. He admitted. Is it that bad? Killian was used to spend more time on the field than in the royal palace. He was unaware that the recent events had made the queen quite unforgiving. Very. Vergrave sighed. Nowadays, a strong mage is worth hundreds of soldiers. Let's be honest. Our mages do not have the blind loyalty the Blood Desert tribes devote to their mysterious leader, nor we invest so much as the Gorgon Empire in nurturing our talented ones. We already are on the losing end of the Cold War with our neighbors for amassing knowledge and power. If my destiny rested only in the king's hands, I could hope for a demotion or a very hard but not impossible task to prove my worth. But Alas, as my first mistake in over 20 years of distinguished career, I had the stupidity to cross the queen on her own turf, almost killing her new golden goose. Gods, I'd give anything to turn back time and slap my stupid self in the face. Vergrave folded his will, putting it into an envelope before passing it to Killian. Please, when this story will be over, get to my wife. Tell Shia it's all my fault, and not to raise our kids hating the kingdom. Killian grabbed his hand, refusing to pick the envelope. You are an outstanding soldier and friend. I'm sure we'll find a way to make them realize that executing you is a mistake and get you out of this pinch. As long there's life, there's also hope. And by the way, if you croak, I call dibs on your sword. Chapter 146. The following day, thanks to a full night of sleep, Lith had regained his cool and started to plan his next moves. First, he needed to find a cure for all the 4 different kinds of parasites. It wasn't only a matter of using that knowledge to guide from the shadows the healers and alchemists. Helping the crown into developing a fake magic spell or drug was of secondary importance. The priority was to find a cure for himself, so that even if everything went south and the plague spread to the rest of the kingdom, he would still be the master of his own destiny. The mana-blocking parasite was the one that worried him the most. Unlike the others, it didn't deal any direct damage to the host, but without mana, a magician was like a wingless eagle. Lith had no idea if it would have the same effect on awakened ones, but he wasn't willing to take unnecessary risks. The first parasite he would study was the one turning healing magic into wounds. It was the only one he was already familiar with, having treated its effects in the past. He could use that advantage to quickly understand how the parasites worked and then apply that knowledge to eradicate them for good. Outside his tent, Lith found a soldier waiting for him. Good morning, sir. The colonel sent me to escort you to his tent for the morning debriefing. Despite both were wearing a mask, Lith could hear the soldier's voice brimming with curiosity. His farmer clothes stuck out like a sore thumb, but with his pocket dimensions still offline, he hadn't much of a choice. It was barely dawn, but the encampment was already bustling with activity. When he entered, both Killian and Vergrave stood up from their chairs, inviting him to join them for breakfast. With all that had happened the day before, Lith had skipped dinner, so he was starving. He didn't like Vergrave, but in his book Hunger Beat Pride with a tennis score. The furniture in the tent had been changed. The hardwood desk and chair were no longer in sight, replaced by a smaller square dining table. This is definitely my kind of debriefing. Eggs, sausages, bacon, everything had a delicious smell. Lith filled his plate, waiting for an explanation. Glad to see you have recovered completely. The buzz cut is a smart move. It will help you blend in. Killian's words made little sense to him, until watching at his reflection in a glass. He discovered that not only his hair was back, but also all the burn marks had disappeared, leaving no scar or discoloration. Solus, when the heck did it happen? Last night. It seems that when you sleep, your healing abilities become strong enough to border regeneration. There was nothing I could do to stop it, and you were exhausted. What are the plans for today? Lith tried to change the topic. That kind of healing was too sophisticated for a simple student, and even if he wanted to, he was unable to replicate it. The state of national emergency has been declared yesterday. By the end of today, the master healers from the 6 big academies should arrive. Vergrave's voice was firm, but from his bloodshot eyes and the dark circles around them, Lith assumed the colonel had spent a sleepless night. To avoid a recurrence of the sabotage that costed Vallegros' life, I have sent a detail to escort the groups here safely. It will take at least until tomorrow to arrange a proper housing for everyone and explain the situation. In the meantime, I have to ask you to keep working on the plagues. Despite the information blackout, the news about Candria are spreading. We have to solve this situation before our weakness is exposed to the neighboring countries. When you are done eating, I would like for you to wear these clothes. Vergrave took out of his dimensional amulet a gray military uniform consisting of leather boots, gray linen pants, and shirt with a white dot on both shoulders, white gloves, and a mask of the same color. Your current outfit makes you an easy target. I have reasons to believe that there are traitors even among us. That uniform, instead, will simply identify you as a plague doctor. Such status will grant you several privileges, among which free movement in all the facilities and authority over the soldiers. Any questions? Yeah, speaking of privileges, can I get back the ability to use dimensional items and all kinds of spells? I'm sorry. Vergrave shook his head, but I can't fulfill neither of your requests. The protocol to grant such privileges inside the small world is classified, and you are still a civilian. Lith gritted his teeth, but remained silent. He had noticed how even Killian kept his communication amulet in his pocket instead of storing it away. That, coupled with the fact several tents were employed as food storage, meant that aside from Vergrave, probably no one could use dimensional items. Any other requests? No. Lith spent the rest of the morning studying the anti-healing parasite. People with open wounds were the perfect test subjects, since it made it easier to extract both the parasite and the toxins. Also, being the parasite with the highest mortality rate, it would give him the opportunity to study what happened after the host's death. First, Lith tried to get a hold of a single parasite with spirit magic. It turned out to be extremely difficult, since the creature was enveloped with toxins that disrupted his mana flow. Once he succeeded, the parasite went into a spasm, causing a lot of pain in the patient, despite already being heavily sedated. His next step was to try to get rid of the toxins before attempting to remove the parasite, but it went even worse. The creature turned out to not be a picky eater. It would consume not only the host's mana, but also the one Lith spent to flush out the toxins. The double feeding had an invigorating effect on the parasite that quickly released more toxins, restoring the balance. To add insult to the injury, his attempt triggered their reproductive cycle. Lith didn't know how long would it take for the eggs to hatch, but he assessed that once it happened, it would become impossible even for him to save the patient. Damn it, either their creator is a true mage too, or is even more paranoid than I am. I can only hope it's the latter case. Otherwise, the whole kingdom is screwed. These things are a masterpiece, while I'm still stuck at the basics of Tier 4. During the afternoon, he decided to change approach. He needed more information to come up with a decent plan, so he went to the morgue. Thanks to the new and improved life vision, he was able to see the aura of death surrounding a corpse. That way, even if invigoration was useless on inanimate objects, he could still find the parasites, whether they outlive their host or not. In any case, he could learn a lot, maybe even collect samples for the alchemist to study. Unnoticed to him, 3 figures stealthily followed him while he walked through the camp, asking for directions. The morgue was located in a tent bigger than the field hospital itself. There were no curtains inside. It was like one huge room. It was perfectly lit by yellow magic stones hanging from the ceiling, while several blue crystals were etched into the tent's fabric, constantly emitting a cold air. The temperature inside was so low that Lith could see his breath steam. The whole space was filled with metal shelves, where countless corpses had been lined up after being wrapped with special blankets that helped to prevent the decomposition. The recently deceased, instead, were in an open space a few meters from the entrance, still laying on the stretchers they had been brought in with. Lith was surprised to find the body of the man he had visited just the day before. Lith still remembered where most of the parasites were located, so he tried to conjure an air dome to protect himself from blood spatters and an air knife to cut through the flesh. Blast! I forgot I don't have air magic anymore. I need a damn surgeon. Without magic, I'll end up butchering the body and bye-bye small, delicate parasites. Before he could get out, the curtain of the tent opened. A masked soldier pointed a sword at him. Don't try calling for help. The tent is soundproof. His voice was made even more menacing by the plague mask. Either you follow me obediently, or your brother will die. Chapter 147. Those words struck a chord inside Lith's very core, triggering something that he had considered dead for a long time. First, the corners of his mouth turned upwards into a smirk. Then, he couldn't stop himself from a chuckle that soon evolved into a hysterical laughter. The traitorous soldier was startled for a second. That wasn't the reaction he was expecting. According to their intel, Lith had a very strong bond with his relatives, using most of his earnings over the years to improve their quality of life and status, instead of trying to buy his way into nobility. It was public knowledge that there was no love left between him and his disowned brother, Orpal, but the other one, Tryon, had been part of the family until he willingly joined the military. He had been well-dressed and fed all his life. According to the locals, despite having different interests and goals, the two brothers went along. Too bad it was just a ruse that the two brothers had agreed upon for their parents' sake. Where Lith felt only spite for Orpal, Tryon didn't fare much better, receiving his complete indifference. Their relationship had never mended, since both of them had never tried to solve their differences. Lith simply didn't care about it. In his twisted vision of the world, he had long drawn a circle, separating the people who mattered from the useless trash where Tryon belonged. Tryon, instead, at first had been too ashamed to approach Lith, after all he and Orpal had done and said to him over the years. Having always followed his older brother's footsteps, he had never developed a sense of kinship toward Lith. They had been strangers to each other for so long that every apology he could think of sounded fake and forced even to Tryon himself. So, he had waited for the right moment to fix that mess, but the moment never came. Lith had too many jobs, first as hunter and Tista's nurse, then healer and bounty hunter. He would never spend much time at home, and when he did, he focused on those that mattered for him. It didn't take even a year for Tryon's feelings to fester again, while his mood turned sour. As any child, he had always dreamed of one day discovering to have an incredible talent, to be special. Yet with each passing day, everything changed only for the worse. While he was stuck in his routine of dreams and chores, Lith grew more and more powerful. His talent inspired awe in their parents first, then Nana, and finally Count Lark. Soon, envy outgrew guilt, and there was nothing to mend anymore. The soldier wasn't aware of all that, so Lith's behavior appeared to him as that of a madman. His laughter was full of scorn, like he was in front of the biggest idiot he had ever met. "Do you really have my brother? Then I have a favor to ask. When you kill him, tell him that I didn't give a SHT about him. I like to pay my debts in kind," Lith said, while taking a small step back. There were so many ways he could have killed him, either by using physical attacks or spirit magic, but neither of them was safe enough for his tastes. Moving at high speed didn't go well with the crow-shaped mask he wore, and being in a morgue full to the brim of victims of the plague, he didn't want to risk for the sword to even scratch his skin. As for spirit magic, the guy was too close for comfort. Lith either had to break his neck, losing the opportunity to interrogate him, or attempt to restrain him, hoping his victim didn't have hidden weapons or wasn't able to use them before the binding was complete. "This is no joke. If we do not get out of here within a minute, my associates will consider the mission failed and order your brother execution." The soldier didn't let Lith get away, even if his sudden fear was twisting his guts. Despite the cold of the morgue, he found himself sweating bullets, blurring his vision from under the mask, with all his body hair standing up. "And why should I care?" Lith kept moving backwards, closer to the metal shelves, the mockery in his tone growing with every step. "Kill him, marry him, whatever. Besides, your plan has several flaws. First, it's easier stealing a dragon egg than taking me alive. Second, I don't believe your communication amulet works. Third, and most important, staging an attack inside a morgue, when most kinds of magic are sealed, is suicidal." Lith had yet to finish talking when a multitude of hands suddenly grabbed the soldier by the left shoulder, arm, and leg. His first instinct was to jump away, but each hand had the strength of a vice, so he slashed at their wrists to force them to release him. Like most soldiers, he had an enchanted weapon, capable of easily cutting unprotected flesh and bone. Yet each strike felt like hitting a rock, making his sword vibrate on each impact. Then, he finally remembered where he was. When he noticed dozens of red, glowing eyes staring at him from the shelves, his mind went blank out of panic. "Did you really believe I would waste my time talking?" Lith chuckled, reanimating more corpses by the second, infusing them with his mana and will. Lith had learned during his first day at the camp that the only elements he was free to use were light and darkness. Light for allowing the healers to keep searching for a cure and darkness to sterilize people and clothes when going from the residential block to the hospital. He had simply exploited his opponent's idiotic speech to stall for the time necessary to rise as bodyguards. The zombies piled up on the wretched soldier, pinning him to the ground. Let's see if you were telling the truth about your associates. Lith activated Life Vision, noticing two human figures sneaking around the morgue's entrance. With a simple thought, he sent a group of undead to welcome the newcomers. The restrained soldier went into panic, screaming and writhing to get free. The zombies' naked bodies were disgusting to see, but even more to the touch. Despite their strength, the flesh was cold and flaccid. Many of them had open wounds, either caused by the parasites or by the autopsy, letting their bodily fluids drench him in a matter of seconds. Stop screaming. As you pointed out earlier, the tent is soundproof. Lith had one of the undead rip the mask off the soldier's face and shove a hand in his mouth. The man barfed for a few seconds before falling unconscious from the terror. When the other two entered inside the morgue, the zombies flooded them. They fought bravely, but were outnumbered and outsmarted. Lith had the undead tanking the strikes and only aiming for the soldiers' masks. Realizing they were against intelligent plague zombies, the two went into frenzy, losing any will to fight and trying to escape, but the tent curtain, like a closed door in a horror movie, refused to budge. How the FCK can a piece of cloth be locked down? A feminine voice screamed. How indeed? Lith chuckled, using wave after wave of spirit magic to keep the door shut and savoring their terror. Soon, all the three traitors were either unconscious or wetting themselves. They knew that without the masks, even if they miraculously managed to escape, it would not change their fate. Their minds were frozen, incapable to decide if to beg for their lives or a swift death. Litha's eyes glowed with a cold red light under the mask. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to talk. Chapter 148. Back at the White Griffin, Professor Marth was facing an unexpected complication. After the state of national emergency had been issued, all the academy staff that had even a shred of knowledge of medicine had been tasked to pack their things and reach Candria as soon as possible. The professors had been permitted to bring along anyone they deemed could help, even students. It was part of the cover story the king had devised to make Litha's presence in Candria seem unimportant. He would just be one of the many youths accompanying their mentors, hoping their talent would be recognized by the crown or at least to gain practical experience. Having only one student from the White Griffin among all the experts would raise too many questions. The departments most affected were two, the light magic and the alchemy department. Despite they were used to cooperate for the most difficult cases, this time the approach on the matter couldn't be more different. For alchemists, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Working without a budget limit with only state-of-the-art instruments, with the opportunity to have them even custom-made, was an offer too good to turn it down. Hence, the alchemy professors had no qualms about bringing students along. They would have minimal interactions with the infected, studying the disease only through tissue samples and in the safety of their labs. For healers, instead, it was a nightmare. Daily contact with the victims, high risks of exposure to the plague, not to mention that according to the reports the mortality rate was akin to a war zone. It was difficult explaining to the ones that volunteered how dangerous the situation was, without either being rude or giving enough details to trigger panic attacks. After turning down many well-meaning amateurs, Marth was at an impasse. Please, Professor, why can't I accompany you? Quilla from Syria seemed unwilling to accept a no for an answer. Because it's too dangerous. He snapped after running out of excuses. Let's be honest, okay? You were 12 years old at her first year of academy. What kind of contribution could you possibly offer? You still have a whole life in front of you. I can't endanger your future on a whim. You are one of the most prized talents your class has to offer, but you are still young and emotional. Believe me, I'm not going on a vacation or a field trip. It's a serious matter. Then why Lith has been sent there? The fierceness in her voice made it more of a statement rather than a question, taking Marth by surprise. Excuse me. Don't try to deny it. First, he gets summoned in the headmaster's office. Then he never returns for dinner or breakfast. And the next day the lessons get suspended. It can't be a coincidence. Her cold logic made him proud, but the worry he perceived made everything clear. Puppy love, the thing that he hated the most. Because no matter how idiotic it was, there was no reasoning with it. Yet he had to try. His case is different from yours. How so? She snorted, stomping a foot. Because he is inhuman. Gods, I wish I could say it out loud, but the queen would kill me. He thought. With Manohar gone, he is our best diagnostician. He actually said. Besides, he has already made several contributions in the theoretical field thanks to his unique understanding of a human body. Otherwise, I would have never let him go. Now, if you excuse me, I'm in a rush. Quilla left Marth's room with a dejected look, the door slamming behind her. Outside, Uriel and Freya were waiting for her. Her face told them everything they needed to know. Why the long face? Quilla asked, noticing that Freya seemed to be on edge, even more than her. My mother just called me. She only said that someone is screwed up big time, and that I must pack my things and be ready to leave the kingdom on short notice. First, I want to know who sent you and why. Lith was very curious about their attempt to capture him. The other team had spared no efforts to kill him, so either the contractor had changed his mind or it was another matter entirely. The first one to answer was the soldier that had tried to blackmail Lith using Trion's life as a leverage. According to the name tag on the uniform, his name was Vikas Bannett, a plain-looking man with chestnut eyes and hair of the same color. His cheeks were still bright red, since Lith had slapped him multiple times to force him regaining his senses. Puke still dirted his mouth in uniform, giving him an even more wretched look. Will you let me go if I tell you? His voice trembled, mustering the courage to look in his captor's red eyes. Of course not. Lith laughed. It would be useless, since you are all already infected. He lied through his teeth. According to Life Vision, the three of them were still healthy, even without the masks and after having been scratched and bitten by the undead. Either the parasites do not handle well the coldness of the morgue, or they die shortly after their host. Too bad I have no time to infect them and study the plague progression. I need to get out of here fast, before someone else comes in. Then why should I tell you? If I have to die, I'll bring my secrets with me in the grave. The certainty of death seemed to have rejuvenated Vika's spirit. Excellent question. Lith clapped his hands. Eat him alive, starting from the feet. His orders were meant for the prisoners to understand their fate, rather than for the undead. The mindless zombies were like puppets, and Lith needed but a thought to make them move according to his will. But why kidnap me? Lith couldn't see the logic behind their actions. Because they are scared of the plague. One of their associates, I don't know who, is the responsible. But he did it behind their backs. They didn't even know it existed. When they understood what had happened, they couldn't trust him anymore. They don't want the plague to be eradicated. It's an all-powerful weapon. But without a cure, they will be forced to either flee or submit. Chapter 149. So, let me get this straight. Lith still doubted Vika's words. Among the group of traitors that is trying to sabotage the Queen's work, there is someone that lead them by the nose while preparing this plague? Vikas nodded, his eyes always fixed on an army of mouths millimeters away from his bleeding flesh. What does this mastermind want? What's the endgame? A zombie lifted Vika's head by the chin, forcing him to look at Lith in the eyes. I don't know. He squealed. The hand holding him was flabby and sticky, secreting decomposition fluids at every movement. The putrid smell would have made him puke already, but there was nothing left but bile in his stomach. Then how come you know so much about your friends and their masters? It seems only a convenient lie to me. Vikas exploded into a feverish laughter. The dreadful experience he was living, being captured, tortured, and allegedly infected, had already pushed him to the brink of insanity. Litha's naivety seemed to be the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Gods, how could my liege believe that someone so stupid could find a cure? He must be an idiot too. We're dead. We are all dead. Lith tried to make him snap out of his hysteria, first with threats and then with slaps, but to no avail. Eat his be LLS. He ordered, canceling the spell that held the pain at bay. Please no. Anything but that. I am sorry. I really am. Vickers stopped laughing, the agony flooding his limbs, and the sight of those drooling mouths nearing his nether regions forced him to regain his senses. Remember, I still hold what's left of your life. If you're so proud of being someone else's dog, then act like one. I say bark, you bark. Otherwise, my friends here will teach you how to play dead. Vickers had served Duke Selimar for years, joining the military and climbing up its ranks only for his master's sake. His parents had abandoned him when he was just 5 years old. They already had too many mouths to feed to care for a talentless, whiny kid. It had been Selimar that had adopted him along with his sworn brothers, saving them from the starvation and the daily abuses at the orphanage. Betraying the crown had been natural for them. They had no loyalty nor gratitude towards the ones incarnating a system that only treated them as trash. He didn't do it out of greed, but out of love. There was nothing he wouldn't do for his foster father. Betraying his trust was already tearing Vickers' soul apart. Being called a dog was too much to bear. If only I could use magic. He snarled, baring his teeth at Lith. It would change nothing. Lith gave him a slap, but this time with his true strength. The force of that simple gesture smeared Vickers' nose over his cheek, making him bleed profusely and dislocated the jaw. Vickers had never been hit with such strength, not even when fighting soldiers twice his size. His pride and defiance crumbled, realizing that the zombies were innocent lambs compared to their shepherd. After the plague was released, Selimar understood that without a cure, he is bound to lose. If the crown wins, he will be executed for treason. If his faction wins, they'll become the mastermind slaves. He fears him, so he didn't tell me anything to not compromise their relationship. Vickers dropped the honorifics. He was a traitor now. He didn't deserve to call him master anymore. The others, instead, are expendable. When Liz Hark and Fernath insisted to have their men assist me, he understood they didn't trust him anymore, so he took precautions. He gave me enough means and information to frame them and their masters so when necessity arose, I could expose them and destroy their credibility, giving my league, Selimar the time to get to safety. This is good news for the crown, but not for me. Lith thought. The accident in Candria revealed the hidden agenda, which in turn is causing them to infight. These morons are so desperate to put all their hopes on me, and I have yet to do anything. The only way to get them off my back is for the cure to be found, and fast. One last question. How could they know what happened and react so fast? How did you bypass the array? It's actually easy. Vickers swallowed a lump of saliva. Last question meant he was about to outlive his usefulness. We were already here, so when you arrived, each of us notified to his master. Whatever you did made the crown move fast, and that made you a target. As for the array, Small World is not perfect, as they say. Whenever Vergrave makes a call, anyone can use his communication amulet. Lith was shocked, but thanks to the mask, nothing transpired. Maybe that's because no one uses dimensional items, and why Vergrave refused to grant me privileges. The array is just like a big switch. When it's off, anything goes. And how do you know when he does it? I don't. I only wait for Selimar's calls. Lith interrogated the other two, but nothing new came up. They were just as Vickers, but with a different master. All of them were plain looking and with the rank of lieutenant. High enough to be able to move freely through the camp, but not enough to make it hard keeping a low profile. Lith kept his promise, giving them a swift death and turning both their bodies and clothes into dust. There are traitors among the nobles, the mages, the army, and even in the royal palace. Without someone reporting exactly when the king is unavailable, it would be impossible to nail the right timing to call inside the quarantine zone. I'm in hot waters, Solus. I need a cure to be found, but it would be really nice if someone else discovers it. I'm already a magnet for troubles. What about those three we now know about? Will you expose them? How could I possibly explain where did I get such information? And even if there was a way, it would paint an even bigger target on my back. The smartest thing to do is not overstepping my boundaries as healer. Soon their disappearance will get noticed, and by searching their possessions, Vergrave will find the evidence on his own. Lith sent all the corpses back to their shelves, setting them free from his necromancy spell before going to search for a surgeon. Thanks to the authority his rank as plague doctor conferred him, everything went smoothly. No one questioned his orders, they only obeyed. Lith had preserved the corpse of the man with the split leg, untouched by darkness magic, because it was the only one he knew where to look for the parasites. The body was moved to a safe zone, and after wearing full body scrubs made of white linen, the surgeon cut it open following Lith's instructions. Even with life vision, Lith wasn't able to find any traces of the parasites or the eggs. He clearly remembered they had laid all around the body. It seems they are unable to survive without the host. Yesterday, this man was a living colony, and now nothing. That would explain how they managed to escape detection so far. The surgeon pondered. These parasites are almost invisible to diagnostic spells when the patient is alive, and after his death, the autopsy can't find any foreign body. Lith took several tissue samples, sending them to the alchemist to be analyzed. Before developing a proper cure, he needed to know if at the moment of their death the creatures released toxins harmful for the patient. The answer came in quickly. As he expected, the tissues presented a foreign substance, but it was an unknown one. It was impossible to tell what effects it could have in a living body, since its concentration in the remains was barely detectable. Collecting and using it for experimentation was impossible. Cursing Hathorn's name and her ingenuity, Lith went to Vergrave asking for a live subject. Based on the information acquired today, I have a theory about the cure. It's unlikely to succeed, high risk, and potentially deadly. Yet I'd like to try it out. Even if it fails, I can gain invaluable data from it. What are the odds of success? Vergrave's hand subconsciously caressed his last will contained in the breast pocket of the uniform. Barely 15%. Considering the difference in talent and experience between Hathorn and himself, Lith felt it was still an optimistic estimate. I like these numbers. Let's do it. Chapter 150. Lith wasn't new to human experimentation, but he usually did it in secret, using his test subjects only people that had tried to kill him or dared to attack his family, that he would have killed anyway after putting them through excruciating pain. Hearing his proposal being accepted by a servant of the kingdom, without even raising an objection, was too much even for him. Is this guy insane? I mean, I don't give a SHT about people's lives too, but at least I pretend to care, especially in front of witnesses. What do you need? Vergrave asked. An infected from the anti-healing parasite. No matter the progress rate of the infestation, at least 3 competent healers and a lot of vials. Successful or not, during the experiment, I plan on extracting the toxins the parasites use to control the mana flow and, with a little luck, those produced upon their deaths. Since both degrade fast without a host, it would be better if the vials are able to replicate the host's life force, or at least slow down the deteriorating process. I know that dimensional items are off limits, but I need something similar or half the work will be for naught. Don't worry, this is not the first time that we use Small World for containing a disease. We are well equipped for all kind of contingencies. When do you want to do it? Lith pondered for a while, trying to make it as realistic as possible. He could actually do everything on his own, but the priority was to not make it seem too easy. Last, but not least, by delegating part of the job, he would get the opportunity to better observe the parasite's reaction to his therapy and react accordingly. Tomorrow morning will be great. I'm too tired now. I want to be at peak condition for the experiment. By the way, I need to impart one of my personal spells to the healers that will assist me, but I can't take out the scroll from my amulet. Vergrave gave him a quill and an inkwell, forcing Lith to show his penmanship. This is really a bad idea, Lith said while the quill moved clumsily along the sheet, screeching from time to time. Since I have learned water magic, I always write with it. Are you sure you can't grant me water magic, or at least let me access my dimensional amulet, even for a second? Vergrave shook his head. I can't do it unless it's absolutely necessary. After a long and painful quarter of hour, Lith gave him something that looked like an ancient coded language, the spacing between the letters almost random. The ink was smeared in several points, making Lith's doctor's handwriting even more mysterious and unfathomable. "Do you think they can learn it by tomorrow?" Lith asked while cleansing the ink from his hands. It would be easier for them to recreate it from scratch, rather than deciphering this gibberish. "Turn around, please, and be ready to get that scroll." Lith did as instructed, keeping his right hand behind his back, allowing Solus to spectate whatever Vergrave wanted to keep hidden. The colonel took a few steps back, positioning himself at the center of the tent. His left eyes emitted a faint light, revealing numerous rune marks on it that moved out of the cornea and in the air surrounding him, allowing Vergrave to operate them like a giant holographic keyboard. Thanks to her mana sense, Solus could see Vergrave connecting himself to the multi-layered array that surrounded the whole region. She already had an idea of the artifact's scope, but only when a link had been established, she was able to understand its breathtaking complexity. Now that Small World was activated, Solus could see the countless runes of power that enveloped every single millimeter of space. Its magic permeated even the items and bodies of all those under its influence. An infinite number of shackles, albeit normally invisible, waited on them. By my maker, this thing is much more complicated than we thought. It's not like a switch. He has to actually rewrite entire strings of runes to make even the slightest change to it. "Do it now." Lith could feel the strain in Vergrave's voice, as Solus could see it on his face. He promptly extracted the scroll, raising it over his head, without turning around for the colonel to see. Vergrave silently nodded, reverting the array to his previous status. The runes moved back into the eye, leaving no trace of their powerful magic, except a faint smell of ozone lingering in the air. Finally, some human language. Vergrave commented, reading the scroll. "The spell is mine, and I like to keep it that way." Lith ignored the remark. "Don't worry. If it proves to be useful for the cure, you'll be properly compensated. Otherwise, I'll make sure your work does not get plagiarized." Lith had no idea how Vergrave could be so confident about it. A non-disclosure agreement was just a piece of paper. An ambitious magician would ignore it and claim Lith's detoxifying spell to be of his own creation. Either he plans to employ his most loyal followers or to just kill them to keep the secret is none of my business. Right now, we have more important things to worry about. That evening, Lith dined alone, revising with Solus the procedure he had devised. First, they worked on all its aspects, improving the chances of success. After that, they tried to anticipate everything that could go wrong, preparing contingency plans for all eventualities. The moon was high in the sky when they finished. Lith was very tired, so he decided to sleep instead of using invigoration. "Seems all the recent events are taking a toll on me. Compared to yesterday, today was pretty quiet, yet I feel beat up. I think it's because of the Small World." Solus pondered, recalling the intricate network of runes that manifested when Vergrave activated the artifact. Fake mages' mana is still, so they are not affected by it, unless they try to conjure magic. In our case, mana constantly flows inside our body, even when we do nothing. Being inside the array is like carrying weights under the clothes. Also, animating so many zombies at once didn't help. Remember what Callus said? They feed on your life force. Lith had barely the time to agree with her analysis, falling asleep as soon as head met the pillow. The next day, Lith met his medical team. They were already wearing a full body scrub when he arrived, leaving only the plague mask partially exposed. He could infer their gender and age only by the voice. Lith explained them what the spell he had imparted would do, and what was their role during the procedure. "That's it? That's your brilliant idea?" said with a scoff a female voice. "This is the most basic plan one could think of. What makes you believe you can pull it off?" "Mostly the fact that before my arrival, you couldn't distinguish the head of the illness from its AS. Not to mention that you dare call it simple only because of my spell." Lith's voice oozed contempt. "I'm explaining all this only because I need your help, not your permission." Indeed, Colonel Vergrave was going to spectate. He wanted to make personally sure that nothing went wrong. "Feel free to leave. Mage Utica. But beware, because your military rank, noble title, and all the funds the crown granted you will remain here, with or without you. Utica folded her arms, but said nothing more. Then, Lith went to the patient, explaining all the risks and making sure she understood the consequences. She was an old woman, thin as a twig, with unkempt white hair drenched in sweat. Her left arm was asunder, barely kept together by sticks and bandages. Her wrinkly face was stretched from the pain. "Don't worry for this old bat, kid." Recognizing his young age, she forced herself to smile. "I've lived my life, had a good husband, good kids, and lived long enough to see my grandkids turn into fine adults. I don't want to spend the rest of my days suffering like a dog. If you succeed, I'll be healed. If you fail, this pain will stop. It's a win-win for me." After putting her to sleep, Litha's experiment began. Like Mage Utica had previously stated, it wasn't complicated. By using Litha's detoxifying spell, the three mages were extracting the toxins that made healing impossible, storing them in magic vials that were promptly sent to the alchemic labs. Lith was following their progress with invigoration, waiting for the right moment. The creatures were rejuvenated by all that mana, but as he predicted, they could not excrete toxins as fast as they removed them. When the arm was almost cleansed, Lith sent tendrils of darkness magic, enveloping the worms with surgical precision before crushing them all at once. Alas, in death they released a substance that seeped into the flesh and bone, making the arm rot at a speed visible at the naked eye. Even the darkness cocoon enveloping the worms was not enough to stop the process. But now the arm was free from the worms and the toxins, allowing Lith to use light magic at his fullest, making it whole and healthy again. While all the others were celebrating, he angrily took off his scrubs. "I am Sodekened. It's been an utter failure.